Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I have always believed in ghosts, but never thought my house was haunted. Until one night, when I had a vivid dream that took place inside my own home. In the dream, I was someone else, running from something unseen. The furniture was different, older than what we had in the house at the time. When I woke up, I felt an overwhelming sense of fear, though I couldn't explain why. Not long after that, strange things started happening. I began hearing footsteps, doors opening and closing on their own, and on occasion, heavy breathing at night. It always seemed to happen around 2 in the morning. I tried to ignore it at first, but on nights when I was still awake, the sounds would always return. Then, when my mom's boyfriend moved in, everything stopped. It was silent. I had given up my bedroom for him and moved into the basement. Over time, I got comfortable down there and decided to stay, even after he moved out. But after he left, the activity returned. This time, it was louder, closer. I would hear heavy footsteps on the basement stairs, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. At first, it was just noises. Then, it got worse. There are 2 rooms in the basement, my bedroom and a storage room. Occasionally, I would find the storage room door unlocked and slightly open. I assumed my mom or sister had been in there, but when I asked, they both denied it. Then there was the heater. My new personal heater started acting strange. It wouldn't shut off until I physically turned on the lights. And then came the night I saw him. I was lying in bed when I heard breathing. Deep, slow breathing. I turned to look, and in the corner of my room stood a tall, dark silhouette. At first, I thought it was an intruder. I reached for something to defend myself, but when I looked back, he was gone. There was nowhere for him to go. My basement isn't big. The only exits were up the stairs or into the storage room, and I never heard a single step. No door creaking open. Nothing. Later, a friend stayed over. I hadn't told him about the noises or what I had seen. I fell asleep first, but in the morning, he looked disturbed. "Did you hear that last night?" he asked. I shook my head. "I thought I heard someone whistling. I looked over at you, but you were asleep. And then, I saw something in the corner. A tall, dark figure. I tried waking you up, but you wouldn't move. And when I looked back, it was gone. That's when I knew it wasn't just me." Then, one night, I came home late, around 2 in the morning. As I walked up to the house, something felt off. I looked around but saw nothing unusual. I shook it off and went inside. I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps coming toward my room. They stopped at the top of the stairs. I figured it was my mom checking if I was home and rolled over. Then, heavy footsteps started descending the stairs. I turned over to look. Nothing. A few minutes passed, and then I heard something stepping closer to me. A soft crinkle, like someone stepping on paper. I looked down, and the papers near my bed were moving, like someone had just stepped on them and then stepped off. The temperature dropped instantly. My heater was on, but suddenly the air felt ice cold. And then I felt it. Pressure. On my throat. At first it was light, but the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I sat up, but something pushed me back down. I wanted to sleep. I felt so unbearably tired. But each time I closed my eyes, the pressure returned, stronger than before. Then my body started moving on its own, flailing, like it was fighting something I couldn't see. I wasn't controlling it. I was just trapped inside it. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. I tried to run, but I was shoved back down. I reached for my phone, but something threw it across the room. Then, out of nowhere, the force grew stronger. I remember looking at my hand in front of me, reaching, before everything went black. I was moving. I could feel my body thrashing, my head jerking, but the only thing I could see was that single frozen moment, my hand reaching forward. Then suddenly, I was staring at my ceiling. I was lying half off my bed, unable to move, my body convulsing. And then, nothing. The next thing I remember, I was waking up hours later, getting ready for work. My body felt exhausted, but I remembered everything. I looked to my side, expecting to find my phone where I always kept it, but it wasn't there. It was still across the room. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what was in that basement with me, but since then, I've only slept in the house 3 times, and I only go into the basement if I absolutely have to. It's been a week now since things have settled down in our house. My fiancé hasn't heard any strange noises coming from the bathroom, and I haven't had any issues with my electronics randomly turning on or off. But my brother has been saying a few things lately that have made me think the little girl who haunts, or used to haunt, our house might still be around. Last weekend, I finally told the spirit that she couldn't stay here anymore. I told her that if she asked for forgiveness and asked Jesus to save her, she could be free and go to him. For a few days, nothing strange happened, and I thought that maybe I'd helped her cross over. But then, my brother Chris started telling me about something unsettling. The past few nights, he says he's woken up to see a little girl standing in the doorway of his room. He's not sure if he was dreaming or awake because he was so tired, but he says it still creeped him out. I thought this was interesting, so I decided to spend the night with him and see if I could experience the same thing. Last night is one I'll never forget. I slept on his floor, and at about 2:40 a.m., I woke up suddenly. Chris did too, because just after I opened my eyes, he said my name like he knew I was awake, but wasn't sure. It was strange, almost like we had woken up at the exact same time. Before I woke up, I had a dream that I was standing in the basement, not doing anything, just standing there. Chris said he had the same dream. We couldn't ignore it. We had to go down to the basement and see what the connection was. When we got to the main floor, the temperature dropped suddenly, and we heard the basement door creak open. We exchanged a nervous glance, then went around the corner to check. We always make sure to shut that door before bed, but now it was wide open. We went downstairs, our hearts racing, and when we reached the bottom, we saw something on the floor. It was hard to make out, so Chris turned the light on. There in the middle of the floor was a small pile of daisies, maybe 3 or 4, with a little wooden cross resting on top of them. We looked at each other, both confused, and Chris shook his head. F*** this, he muttered, then quickly turned and went back upstairs. I stayed behind, trying to figure out what was going on. I grabbed a chair and sat down in front of the flowers. I stared at them, trying to make sense of it, when I suddenly caught a shadow out of the corner of my eye. I looked up, and there she was, the little girl. She had finally felt comfortable enough to show herself to me. I couldn't help it. I smiled at her. I asked her if she was leaving us, and to my surprise, she smiled back. Then, she lifted her hand and began to wave at me, but just as quickly, she disappeared completely. I knew that this was her way of saying goodbye, and I was happy for her. She was going to a better place. I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, even a little joy, that she was finally free. I went back upstairs to Chris' room, crawled into my sleeping bag, and fell asleep. When I woke up this morning, I went down into the basement again to grab the daisies and the cross. I took them outside and planted the daisies in a small spot in the garden, placing the cross behind them in the soil. I felt a little sad as I did it. Over the past few weeks, I had grown kind of fond of her. She'd become almost like a little friend, always wanting me to play ball with her and prank my brother. It's going to be tough not having her around, but I know it's for the best. She's finally where she belongs. A few years ago, I went to visit my great-uncle's grave. I wanted to leave him his favorite flowers and an American flag. I stood there for a while, talking to his tombstone, hoping he would know I still thought about him, even though I had only met him once. I admired him and would never forget him. People often assumed he died in the war, but he didn't. He passed away from natural causes. As I stood there, it began to rain. I love the rain, but I realized I'd forgotten a jacket. My shirt was getting damp, and the cold started to seep in. I was starting to shiver when, out of nowhere, I felt warmth. I looked up and saw a boy smiling at me. He said, "You'll catch a cold if you stand in the rain like that." He offered me his jacket. I accepted, grateful for his kindness. We finished up at the grave, and the boy offered to walk me back to my grandparents' house. He said he didn't want me walking alone, that it wasn't safe. So we started walking together. After about an hour, my mom drove up near us and motioned for me to get in the car. She said she was just about to come find me. I turned to the boy, ready to return the jacket, but he waved me off. He smiled, said goodbye, and walked away. I got in the car and we headed home. The next day, as I was doing laundry, I found the jacket he had given me. I decided to wash it and return it to him. When I checked the pockets, I found something strange. There was an address written on a small piece of paper. After washing the jacket, I drove to the address. It was a small, one-lane road with just one house. I knocked on the door, and a woman opened it. I explained that her son had loaned me his jacket the night before and that I wanted to return it. When I told her, she looked at me in shock, then broke down in tears. She looked down, clearly upset, and I thought she might be angry with me, but she wasn't. Through her tears, she told me that her son had passed away exactly a year ago. He couldn't have given me his jacket, but then she said something that left me speechless. The jacket I was holding was the one he had worn the night he died. I didn't know what to say. I ended up keeping the jacket, and as I drove back to California, it became my favorite one. Strange things started to happen after that, though. Every time I went back to Indiana, the boy seemed to follow me. I remember one time when I was on a plane flying back to Indiana, we hit some really bad turbulence. The plane dropped quickly, and I woke up with a start. There, sitting next to me in the empty seat, was the boy. His hand was on mine. After a moment, the plane stabilized, and everything seemed fine again. When I looked back, he was gone. A little later, that night, I was in my mom's basement watching my baby cousin Jarrett. I was using her laptop when once again I saw the boy. He smiled at me, kissed my forehead, and then just left. Every time I visit Indiana, he shows up. He places his hand on mine, then disappears. It's always the same. I can't help but wonder, is this ghost following me, or is there something else to it? I still don't know what to make of it all. When I was 13, my parents divorced after my dad cheated on my mom. He moved in with his girlfriend, and for the next 6 years, they lived together. Last year, they bought a huge house in Elk Grove, California, on half an acre of land with miles of undeveloped land behind it, where new homes were planned. The house had only one previous owner, a couple who sold it after their own divorce, barely living in it for a year. I didn't live there full time. I stayed with my mom and visited my dad on weekends. But from the moment they moved in, I always felt uneasy in that house. It wasn't anything I could explain, just a strange feeling of being watched. I tried to dismiss it. After all, it was a new house, barely 2 years old. I'd be sitting on the couch, watching TV, and sometimes I'd see the light in the family room dim as though something moved through it. I didn't think much of it. I was skeptical. Maybe it was just the power flickering, or my mind playing tricks. Then, one evening, it happened again. I was sitting with the family when I saw a shadow pass through the family room. I figured I was just imagining things, but then my stepmom said, "Did you see that?" My dad replied, "Yeah, I saw it too." I didn't want to say anything at first, but now that you mentioned it, I was stunned. It wasn't just me. A few weeks later, I had another unsettling experience. My dad and his girlfriend went to Home Depot, and I was upstairs in the computer room alone. The desk faced a wall, and there wasn't much space behind me, only about 2 feet. I was checking my email when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was so distinct. I froze in place, too scared to turn around. I knew there was no one there, no one at home. I didn't tell anyone about it. After that, I started visiting less often. Things only seemed to escalate. They had a border collie who used to love going outside, but now she refused to step foot in the backyard unless absolutely necessary. When we opened the door, she bolted outside, and when we tried to bring her back in, she'd fight us, almost as if she were terrified. She'd even pee on herself, and she'd never done that before. She'd been house-trained since she was a puppy. One night, I was staying in the guest room. I looked up and saw what I can only describe as a black blob, slowly rotating in the corner of the room. It wasn't there during the day, but every night it appeared. I showed my dad, and to my surprise, he saw it too. We didn't know what to make of it. This went on for a couple of months, with occasional glimpses of shadows and strange feelings. Then one evening, I woke up feeling thirsty. I turned on the stair lights and went downstairs, with the dog following me closely behind. As I walked down the stairs, I heard it, whispering, soft but distinct, right in my ear. My blood ran cold. The dog, who had been following me, suddenly bolted through the kitchen, barking like she was terrified of me. It was like she saw something I couldn't. I ran back upstairs, tripping on the last step, and locked myself in my room. I fell asleep with my hands over my ears, too scared to hear anything else. I didn't tell anyone, though. I didn't want to draw attention to it. If I talked about it, maybe it would just get worse. A few weeks later, my dad's girlfriend was out of town, and my dad was home alone. It was bedtime, and he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, which had no door, just an open archway separating it from the bedroom. While he was facing the mirror, he saw a shadow move quickly across the bedroom, visible in the reflection. He turned around, but no one was there. Then he started hearing strange bangs all over the house, upstairs, downstairs, in every room. Not one to be easily scared, my dad decided to confront whatever it was. He stood in the dark family room, calling out to the entity, daring it to show itself. F********, you, he shouted. Show me what you've got. And then, right in his ear, he heard a low, deep growl. He said he was frozen, paralyzed with fear, but he didn't let it show. He went to the kitchen for a glass of water, then walked back upstairs like nothing had happened. When he called me later, his voice was shaky. I could feel the fear in his words, and it sent chills down my spine. I told him about the things that had happened to me. The next day, my dad tried to get a priest to bless the house, but the earliest he could get one was 2 days away. In the meantime, he took matters into his own hands. He grabbed the Bible and went from room to room, reading verses for about 20 minutes in each room. While he was in the family room, we heard a loud metallic bang from upstairs, like an old air conditioner kicking on. We went upstairs to check, but nothing was out of place. The sound didn't match our air conditioner at all. It didn't even sound like it came from the house. It was just wrong. After that, the dog started acting normal again. She came inside without hesitation, and we never saw the black blob again. Whatever had been haunting the house seemed to have gone away. But the strangest thing happened a few weeks later. It was Christmas, and we decorated the staircase with lights and ornaments. We took pictures to remember the occasion, and when we uploaded the photos later, we noticed something strange. In every single picture, there was an orb moving up the staircase, as though it was traveling from one photo to the next. When we zoomed in on one of the orbs, we could see a distinct face inside it. After that, we never had any other paranormal experiences, and we never talked about it much after the house was blessed. But I still wonder, what was that? Was it just our imagination, or was there something truly otherworldly in that house? My mother comes from a place where things are still very old-fashioned and separated from the city. Her whole life, she's had experiences and encounters with things that can't be explained. She's not new to seeing ghosts or strange entities, but the story I'm about to tell is one that both she and I will never forget. My father wasn't a good man when he was alive. My mother has more painful memories of him than happy ones. I don't really remember him at all until I met him when I was about 8 years old. To me, he was a stranger. a stranger who had brought nothing but pain into my mother's life. When I was 10, he decided to take his own life in a violent way. It was during that week, after learning of his death and attending his funeral, that strange things began happening. My mother didn't seem like she was just mourning. She seemed afraid more than anything. I remember one day she told my aunt about the plants she had on the back porch. She had gotten into the habit of leaving a glass of water out for the recently deceased. I never understood why. That morning, she noticed that all the plants had been torn apart, like someone had ripped them right out of the pots. The glass of water was spilled all over the place. My aunt told my mom that she had heard a voice whisper in her ear, "It's not worth it," while she was sitting at the table mourning. From that point on, my mother seemed to be followed by something. It wasn't until I was older that she started telling me about all the things she had experienced. For years, she believed she was being haunted by my father's restless spirit. She would tell me how she felt like someone was always watching her, especially at night. When she was trying to sleep, she'd suddenly smell the scent of men's cologne, and sometimes she would feel someone lying beside her in bed. But she never had the courage to turn around and look. When she would take a bath, she would get this uneasy feeling, like someone was standing outside, looking in. There was one time when she got out of the shower crying and completely terrified. She told me that something had struck her across the back. I looked at her back, and there was a red mark, almost like the shape of a letter. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, shocked and unsure of what I was seeing. My mother would tell me that she could tell when my father's ghost would visit her room. Every night she'd hear the sound of a train from a distance. Soon after, the smell of cigars and cologne would fill the room. It broke my heart to see my mother in such pain. So one night, I decided to stay up. I remember hearing that train, just like she described. I went outside and called out to the man I had met only once in my life, the man I couldn't even bring myself to call father. I told him to leave. I told him to leave in peace and to bring my mother peace, too. As I said it, I felt this burning anger. I didn't want him to hurt her anymore. I asked him to rest. About a week later, I noticed a change in my mother. She wasn't as afraid to be alone or go to sleep anymore. I asked her if she was feeling all right, and she told me something that made my heart settle. One night, she said she had heard my father's voice calling out for her forgiveness. She woke up and looked around, and then softly said, "I forgive you." It was at that moment she knew my father's restless spirit had found peace. In March, my husband and I went to the Queen Mary as part of our honeymoon. I've always been curious about ghosts and the supernatural. I'm open to learning, but I don't jump to conclusions. I like to think things through and try to figure out if what I'm seeing is truly supernatural, or if there's a logical explanation behind it. That being said, there were a few things on the Queen Mary that left me wondering. There's definitely something on that ship that doesn't seem entirely human. The one night we stayed on the ship, we had booked a room, and during the day we explored. We learned about the ship's history, had a nice lunch, and visited the ballroom, which was beautiful. As night fell, we decided to take the haunted tour. At first, I was a bit skeptical. Most of the people in our group seemed to think everything around them was supernatural, which made it hard to focus on the experience and really pay attention to what we were hearing and seeing. The first part of the tour didn't offer anything too unusual. I started to feel like maybe we had wasted our money, but things changed when we made our way to the boiler room. Our group, led by our tour guide Erica Frost, was joined by a security guard and another guide who brought up the rear. The security guard locked the gate behind us as we walked down dark corridors, climbed steep stairs, and squeezed through tight spaces. We ended up in the area where the POWs had been kept when the ship was a military vessel. Once we were settled, Erica asked us to turn off our flashlights and just let our senses adjust to the environment. We sat quietly for a couple of minutes when suddenly I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking above us. At the same time, I clearly heard a voice say, "Help us." The voice was calm but growing closer, almost as if it was walking down the stairs. The sound of the footsteps stopped as soon as someone spoke, and the voice faded. I still heard "help us" for a while, but the moment someone turned on their flashlight, the feeling in the air changed. I felt a chill, but I was too curious to let it stop me. I wanted to continue, so we moved on with the rest of the tour. There weren't any other strange experiences until we reached the pool area. In the pool area, my husband felt very uncomfortable. He said he could feel something, or someone, watching him. The darker corners of the room seemed to pull my attention. I snapped a few photos and caught some large orbs in the pictures, but nothing else unusual happened. However, the most intense moment of the night came when we went into the changing rooms. We were told to each pair up and step into a shower stall, turn off our flashlights, and sit quietly in the dark. At first, I could barely make out the shapes of the people in the stall across from us, but soon, everything around us seemed to shift. There were black, shadowy figures walking just outside our stall. The darkness was so thick that the people across from us vanished completely. One of these dark figures stopped right outside our stall. It felt like I had to touch it, so I reached out my hand, but quickly pulled it back because it was freezing cold. I touched my husband's arm, and he said it felt icy too. Right then, Erica, the tour guide, spoke up, saying something was happening outside our stall. I didn't need any confirmation. I knew exactly what she meant. As soon as we left the pool area, my husband said he felt a lot better. He had been feeling lightheaded and weak, but as we walked away, the heaviness seemed to lift. That night, when we slept on the Queen Mary, there were no more strange experiences, but I never felt quite right. I had a headache the whole time and just felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. When we checked out and left the ship, I instantly felt better. It was a truly unforgettable experience, one that left me more intrigued and even more convinced that there's something on that ship, something not quite of this world. Since I was about 9 or 10 years old, I've been able to feel ghosts. I've heard them, felt them touch me, and sensed their presence, but I never actually saw one until I was 18. We had just moved out of the house I'd lived in from kindergarten through my early teens. It was a house I was sure had a ghost, but it was a friendly one that only bothered me a few times. We moved into a 2-story townhouse, and I absolutely adored it. My sister and I had the upstairs rooms, which each had a large sliding glass door opening to a balcony. At first, everything seemed perfect, but I started noticing strange things almost immediately. My room would get unbearably cold at night, even though the rest of the house felt warm. I complained to my mom about it, and she said it was because of the sliding glass door. She bought thick curtains to block out the chill, which helped a little, but the room was still far colder than the rest of the house. I'd usually come home around 10:30 or 11 at night and talk to my boyfriend on the phone before heading upstairs to bed. Every time I walked into my room, I'd get this eerie feeling, like someone was watching me. At first, I ignored it, but it didn't go away. One night, I was woken by the sound of footsteps running back and forth in the hallway. I figured it was my parents or my brother, since all our rooms were upstairs. The next morning, I asked if anyone had been up, walking around during the night, but they all said no. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. That wasn't the only odd thing. One night, I woke up around 1 or 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps down the stairs, followed by the door to the backyard slamming open and shut. I was so scared I turned over in bed and forced myself back to sleep, trying to ignore it. I told my boyfriend about how strange my room felt, like someone was always there. He laughed it off and said I was crazy, until one night when he came over to my house to watch a movie. We went into my room, and as he was putting the movie in, he suddenly dropped the disc. He looked over at me, pale, and said, "Now I don't want to scare you, but I just saw a lady standing on your balcony. She just vanished." I didn't see her, but my boyfriend had. He described her as having long blonde or white hair and wearing a blue dress. He was shaken, but it wasn't just him. He finally started believing me when it came to the strange things happening in my room. A few nights later, my boyfriend was babysitting my 1-year-old brother while my parents were out. He put my brother down for a nap in the crib upstairs and went downstairs to relax. After a while, he started hearing footsteps from upstairs and some noises. He went up to check on my brother, and when he walked into the hallway, he noticed the bathroom light was on. He turned it off, thinking nothing of it, but then he noticed something strange. When he walked into my parents' room, my brother was still asleep in his crib. But when he went back down the stairs, he heard more footsteps and decided to go back upstairs to check again. This time, the bathroom light was on again. He turned it off, but when he walked into the room, he was startled. My brother was sitting up in his crib, staring at the wall. He wasn't crying, which was unusual. He usually woke up crying when he stirred. He didn't even acknowledge my boyfriend as he walked into the room. Things didn't stop there. A week or so later, we were all in the living room. Me, my boyfriend, my stepdad, and my little brother. We were sitting on the couch, and I heard a noise. When I turned, I saw a woman standing there in the hallway. My heart raced as I called out, "Mom?" But when I got up to look, no one was there. The woman had vanished. I'd seen her before in my mind's eye, the woman my boyfriend had described on the balcony. She had blonde hair and a blue dress, but I thought it was my mom at first because of her blonde hair. I searched the house but found no sign of my mom. It was the same woman. Another time, my boyfriend spent the night downstairs. In the middle of the night, he woke up to find the woman standing at the end of the couch, just staring at him. She stayed there for a few minutes, then walked away. He saw her feet as she climbed the stairs and heard footsteps in the hallway above him, heading straight for my room. This woman, the only ghost I'd ever seen, was strange. She never seemed angry or malicious, but there was something unsettling about her. It was like she wanted something, but I couldn't figure out what. I never felt threatened by her, but she definitely creeped me out. It was almost like she was trying to get my attention, and the more I tried to ignore her, the more persistent she became. I'm 19 years old, and I've been a strong believer in Christ for some time now. Still, I have my own struggles, personal demons that I've been battling for a while. I haven't always been religious, and I have my reasons for turning to my faith. For most of my life, I've been skeptical about ghost stories and anything supernatural. It just never seemed real to me. But lately, things have felt different. I've been having this strange feeling, like something bad is going to happen. It's hard to explain, but it's like a weight I can't shake off. I also have this unusual ability to sense things. I can usually tell what's about to happen, even if it's something small, like someone calling me. It's not always perfect, but I get these strong feelings about things before they happen. A few nights ago, I was getting ready for bed, just about to fall asleep, when something strange happened. It was probably after 3 a.m., and I heard a scraping noise in my room. It sounded like something was dragging across the floor, and the sound got closer every few seconds. My heart started racing. I didn't want to move or even look, but I felt like I had to stay still. It didn't feel like a physical threat, but it definitely wasn't normal. The noise kept coming closer until it felt like it was right under my bed. I was too scared to move, but then, out of nowhere, the poster on the wall beside my head blew off. The sudden movement shocked me, and I jumped up. I prayed for a while, just to calm myself down, and then I went back to sleep, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. For the next few days, nothing happened, but I couldn't shake the unease I felt. I felt like something was still lingering. Then last night, I came home late and tried to sleep, but it was hard to drift off. Finally, around 4 a.m., I started to fall asleep, but my mind wouldn't quiet down. I had this dream about my job, just a normal dream at first. Everything seemed fine, until the a.m. Something hit me in the face. It wasn't a soft tap, but something with real force behind it. It felt like it hit my whole face at once, and though it wasn't painful, it was strong enough to wake me up completely. I lay there for a few minutes, confused, trying to figure out what had just happened. I was so shaken that I stayed in bed, too scared to move. I prayed some more, hoping that would help me settle, but I couldn't sleep. Then, as I tried to drift back to sleep, the strangest thing happened. It was starting to get light outside, so I felt a little safer. I finally managed to fall asleep again, but this time, the dream turned unsettling. I was in a restaurant, and I started to cough and choke. Suddenly, I snapped out of it again. But this time, it wasn't a dream. I was awake, but I couldn't move. I felt completely paralyzed. My heart was racing, and it felt like something was controlling me. My ears started ringing, and I felt completely trapped. I could see my room, but my head was being forced to turn to the right. There was a poster on my wall, but as I looked at it, it morphed into something else. A hand, a dark, sinister hand that seemed to reach toward me. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't move. I was trapped, unable to breathe properly, struggling to escape. I remembered to pray, and after a moment, the pressure seemed to ease. But I was wrong. It came back, even stronger than before. This time, my blankets were pulled off the bed, and I could barely move. I kicked my legs, prayed again, and tried to speak, but all I could say was, "God help me." This happened not once, not twice, but at least 5 or 6 times. Every time, the pressure would stop for a minute or so, then return, stronger each time. I felt completely drained, like I was fighting something that wouldn't let go. Shadows seemed to move on the walls, swirling around me. Then on the 6th time, something even stranger happened. My door opened. I thought it was my mom, so I tried to call out to her, but no words came. I could barely whisper, "Mom, help. I can't move." But there was no answer. The door shut again, and I felt something grab my leg. I was beyond terrified now. My door opened once more, and I heard something moving closer to my bed. Then, something was under the bed. I tried to shout again, but nothing came out. I couldn't even scream. It finally stopped, but I was left feeling shaken and confused. The entire experience lasted well over an hour. By the time I realized what had happened, it was 7:30 in the morning. I hadn't slept at all. My mom never came to check on me, even though I thought I had called for her. I'm not scared anymore, but I still don't know what happened. I don't know why it happened, or if it will happen again. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something I don't understand, something that's happening to me, and I don't know how to stop it. Psalm 144:1, Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my fingers for war and my hands for battle. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My family and I moved into this house in the summer of 1992, and from the very first moment I stepped through the door, I knew something was wrong. The real estate agents had done their best to clean the place up, but the damage was impossible to ignore. The tile floors were cracked, as though someone had taken a hammer to them. The backyard looked abandoned, overgrown and neglected, with a dilapidated kids' clubhouse tucked in the corner that gave me an immediate, unsettling feeling. Something told me to leave it alone. I didn't know it at the time, but that house had already begun to make its mark on me. It was a house that invited unease, a place where I would start to notice small things, items of clothing disappearing, strange noises in the middle of the night, and our dogs acting like they were seeing things that we couldn't. But it wasn't until a few years in that things escalated. One night I was up late, playing video games in the living room. The house was completely dark except for the flickering light from the portable screen of my game. I was lying on the couch, immersed in the game, when I suddenly felt the weight of someone watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't just a feeling. It was an overwhelming presence, like someone was standing right behind me, silently observing me. I didn't dare look. I quickly turned off the game, pulled the covers over my head, and forced myself to sleep, praying that I wasn't going to see something when I finally looked. Another night after my mom and brothers had gone to bed, I turned off the lights and said goodnight to my dad. He responded with a casual night, but then there was a pause, followed by a deep, guttural voice. It wasn't my dad. The voice was too deep, too unfamiliar. I couldn't make out what it said, but my heart was pounding. I joked, "Nice try, Dad," but he swore it wasn't him. We both sat there, uneasy, and just went to bed, but neither of us was able to shake the feeling of that voice lingering in the room with us. I started refusing to sleep in my room. I told my parents it was just because I liked being in the living room with the TV all to myself, but that wasn't the full story. My room had 2 big windows, and at one point, a door that led out into the backyard. Even after my dad sealed it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching, waiting. Every night, I was woken up by strange whispers coming from outside, whispers that didn't sound like anything I recognized. I was terrified of what might be waiting out there, just beyond the glass. I never found the courage to pull up the blinds. Then there was the shadow. At first, I thought I was imagining things, seeing something out of the corner of my eye, but it wasn't just me. My mom, dad, and even my brother saw it. A shadowy figure would walk past, often in the hallway or in the front part of the house. Our dog would bark at it like it was something real. We never understood what it was, but it made its presence felt. It wasn't aggressive or violent, but it was always there, lurking in the edges of our vision. Then one night, it escalated further. My second youngest brother, who had recently moved into the back room next to mine, came running out of his room, crying. I was already awake, and I saw him rush by me, terrified. He told my mom that he had opened his eyes in the middle of the night to see a white cat-like creature at the foot of his bed, staring at him. My mom tried to comfort him, saying it was just a pillow or a dream, but he couldn't shake it. He ended up sleeping in her room that night. I didn't go back to check on the hallway, even though I felt the pull to see what was there. I froze, unwilling to face whatever was lurking in that dark space. As time went on, the house seemed to take on a more active role. In the bathroom near the kitchen, a strange image began to form on the green marble floor, an unmistakable outline of an angel. We all saw it. It wasn't some trick of the light. It was clear, defined, like it had been intentionally left there for us to see. We even took pictures to show a friend. Soon after, another image, this time demonic faces, began to appear on the wood in the living room. These were unmistakable, their twisted features standing out starkly against the wood grain. It felt like the house was becoming alive, like it was trying to communicate with us in ways we couldn't understand. The final straw came when, just before we moved out, another angelic image appeared in the bathroom, this time on the white marble floor. It was as clear as the first, but it felt like a warning, a message that we had overstayed our welcome. My stepdad lost the house shortly after, and for the first time in years, we all felt a wave of relief. The hostility that clung to that place was like a disease, infecting our lives, shaping our thoughts, and changing the way we interacted with each other. Sometimes I didn't even know who I was anymore. But even when we left, the house didn't let go. I still find myself dreaming about it, waking up in a cold sweat, feeling the same sense of dread and anxiety. Every dream takes me back to that house on W. Elmwood Avenue, where horrible things are waiting, things I can never fully escape. And sometimes, I still hear the whispers in the dark. When I was younger, I had some health problems, and there was one time I had to stay a few days in the hospital. I was 10 years old at the time. It was there I met a girl named Isabella. She was a year older than me, and by the end of the first day, we became really good friends. The next day, Isabella and I spent a lot of time together, visiting all the floors in the hospital. I don't remember exactly how many there were, but I think there were at least 10. The only floor we didn't visit was the 8th one. A nurse told us to stay away from it, and naturally, being kids, that only made us more curious about it. That night, around 3 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know the hospital rules, so I thought it'd be fine if I just slipped out and went to see Bella. I quietly left my room and got in the elevator. I pressed the button for floor 4, or at least, I thought I did. I can't quite remember. The elevator started moving up, but it felt like I had gone further than just a floor or two. I looked up, and I was already passing floor 6. The elevator continued until it reached floor 8. The doors opened. At that moment, I wasn't scared. I figured I must have accidentally pressed the wrong button, and since I was already there, I thought I'd just check it out. But then, I remembered what the nurse had said about staying away from floor 8. So, of course, I stepped out of the elevator and began to walk down the dark hallway. There were no lights, and the floor felt very old, like it was waiting for some repairs or renovations. I was already curious, but there was a strange heaviness in the air that made me uneasy. I turned a corner, and then I heard something. A voice. A little girl's voice. It was so clear. "Hello," she yelled. At first, I didn't think much of it. It sounded like a young girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I thought maybe she had wandered out of her room. Even though I was startled, I didn't feel scared. Not yet. But when I turned around, there was no one there. I thought, okay, maybe she just left. So I looked around the corners, but still, nothing. Then, the really creepy part happened. I heard it again, a faint laugh. It sounded like the same little girl, but it was so soft and echoey. If it were daytime and the halls were busy, I might have brushed it off as playful laughter. But it was silent, just me and the darkness, and the laughter. It made my skin crawl. I decided right then that I needed to go back to my room. I walked quickly back to the elevator, hitting the down button over and over, hoping it would come faster. When the doors finally opened, I rushed inside and pressed the button for floor 2, the floor I was staying on. But just as the doors were closing, I heard her voice again. I remember exactly what she said, "Let's play tomorrow." I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I got to my room, jumped under the covers, and stayed there for the rest of the night, shaking. It might not sound that scary now, but when you're 10 and walking those empty, dark halls alone, with only that little girl's voice following you, it's terrifying. I never told anyone about it, not even Isabella, and I never went back to that floor or into that elevator again. From then on, I was a stairs person. Amen for stairs. This happened 3 years ago, and to this day, that voice still freaks me out. The only other time I went to that hospital was to visit my auntie. It was the same place, and when I heard she was on floor 8, I didn't even think twice. I left the hospital so fast, knowing I wasn't welcome on that floor. I knew she didn't want me there, and I don't think I'll ever step foot in that hospital again. No amount of money would make me go back. So, lesson learned. Never walk those dark halls so late at night, and always listen to the nurses. I grew up in Darjeeling, a peaceful hill station in India, though my parents decided to buy an apartment in Siliguri, a smaller town at the foot of the hills. They wanted to avoid the harsh winters that came with living up in the mountains. Our apartment complex was quiet, nestled close to the Sakna forest, with fresh air, clear skies, and breathtaking views of tea gardens and rolling hills. It was the kind of place where you could truly relax. One of my routines was teaching a tribal woman from the area how to read and write in English. She often shared eerie stories with me about her village, tales of witches who had retreated deeper into the forest after our colony had been built. I never gave much thought to these kinds of stories, though I'd had a few unexplainable experiences in my life. But it wasn't until December of 2012, when I was 29 and in a happy relationship with a girl from the same colony, that something happened that I'll never forget. We had a tradition of meeting on the rooftop in the evenings. It was our special spot, the place where we'd talk for hours while enjoying the night air and the beautiful views of the hills. One evening, she called me to the roof around 8 p.m. The sky was pitch black, and thick clouds had covered the stars. As we sat near one of the 3 entrances, the quiet of the night surrounded us. The roof was empty, just the 2 of us, and we were enjoying the peace. But then, I noticed something strange. There was a red rug hanging over the railing, and something orange, about 3 feet tall, was blocking part of it. At first, I didn't think much of it. The dim light from a nearby construction site lit up the terrace enough for me to see the colors clearly. We continued talking, but then we both noticed the figure moving. It swayed back and forth, almost like it was being blown by the wind, but there was no breeze. I thought it might be the retriever dog from our building, standing on its hind legs near the railing. We decided to check, worried that the dog might jump over the edge. But as we got closer, around 12 feet away, my girlfriend stopped dead in her tracks. I turned to look at her, and her eyes were locked onto whatever was by the railing. Slowly, I moved closer, and then I saw it too. It wasn't the dog. It was the lower half of a woman's body. There was no torso, no head, just the legs. She was wearing an orange skirt, tribal in style, swaying side to side, but there was nothing above the waist. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to process what I was seeing. The outlines of her legs were clear, but the rest of her just wasn't there. The figure seemed to move closer, but I couldn't tell if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand, and with all the courage I could muster, I started backing away slowly. She was too scared to speak, tears running down her face. I led her down the stairs and out of the building, where we joined our friends and family. They could see how pale and shaken we were, but we didn't say anything about what we had seen. After that night, everything changed. My girlfriend and I never went back to the rooftop at night again. Strangely, our relationship also began to fall apart not long after. We fought constantly, and eventually, we broke up. I sometimes wonder if that night had something to do with it. I tried to find out if anyone had died during the construction of the colony, but there were no records of such an incident. Even after returning to the roof at night, I never saw the figure again. I still don't know what it was, a spirit, a witch, or something else entirely. I have come to believe that the paranormal is a form of energy, vibrating at a different frequency. Sometimes their world and ours align, and we catch a glimpse of something that isn't really meant for us. If we don't disturb them, maybe they won't disturb us. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? I work as a mechanic at a very busy and popular motorcycle shop. Can't name it, but trust me, it's a madhouse. There's me and 6 other guys, and on any given day, we manage to get through around 25 bikes in about 10 to 11 hours. Doesn't sound like much. Well, that's because we don't just do repairs. We also handle custom paint jobs, custom builds, and all sorts of other time-consuming stuff. So yeah, we're constantly slammed. There's no room for messing around. But for some reason, someone seems to have the time to pull pranks on us. This past Monday, May 5, the shop was insane. The showroom was having a huge sale, and for some ridiculous reason, the owner thought it'd be a good idea to put a few things on sale in the shop too. So we were already swamped with work, and then we had to deal with that. Around noon, I decided to take a break and grab lunch from Jack in the Box. When I came back to my work area, I couldn't believe what I saw. Every drawer in my toolbox was open, and all my sockets were scattered all over the floor. I yelled at Rod, telling him if he needed to borrow something. He didn't need to make such a mess. I was a bit more colorful with my language, though. He swore he wasn't near my bench. He'd been doing airbrush work the whole morning. The pranks didn't stop there. Throughout the rest of the day, tools went missing, and I'd find drawers open when I knew I'd closed them. It was like something was just playing games with us. Finally, it was time to close up for the night. Since I'm the manager of the maintenance department, I usually stay an hour later than everyone else to finish up invoices and other paperwork. I was at my bench, pricing out a few things a customer wanted, when I heard someone cough. It came from the hallway that leads to the dumpsters. Now that door requires a special code to open and can only be opened from the inside. Plus, it makes a loud creak and slam when it opens. So needless to say, I was a little freaked out when I heard the cough, but found no one there when I checked. I walked down the hallway to see if the door was propped open. Nope, it was shut tight. I was about to head back to my bench when I heard the coughing again. This time, it was coming from inside the shop. I jogged through the shop to see who was still around, but again, no one. At that point, I just stood there thinking, great, now I've got to deal with this at work too. I went back to my bench to finish the invoices, important ones that needed to be entered into the system right away, but they were gone. That was it. I was done. I grabbed my coat, didn't bother sweeping, didn't power wash the floors, and just left. I got home and told my fiancé and brother about what happened. Chris thought it was hilarious. He's usually the one who gets pranked by ghosts. He had his little fun with it, but that was the end of it, or so I thought. The next day, I walked into the shop and nearly dropped my coffee. All of our tools were spilled all over the floor, and a hose I had neatly rolled up before I left was now uncoiled, with water pouring out of it. That was it. I was seriously fed up, so I started yelling at whatever spirit was causing all the chaos. After that, I started cleaning up, putting the tools back in their places. As I was doing this, I swear I heard a chuckle coming from the hallway. A low, mischievous chuckle. Yeah, I said loud enough for whoever was listening. So funny. I'm having the time of my life over here. I probably looked pretty ridiculous talking to nothing. But hey, I was done with the jokes. The rest of the day went by without anything too weird happening. But when it was closing time and I was alone again, things got strange again. I started smelling cigarette smoke, faint but there. I followed the scent to the same hallway, and of course, there was nothing. Then, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The invoices that had gone missing the day before, neatly stacked on my workbench. I couldn't help but smile. I figured I'd finally gotten through to the spirit, and maybe it felt a little bad about the chaos. Since then, nothing out of the ordinary has happened. Well, except for a power outage that occurred when two mechanics started yelling at each other. Was the spirit angry? I don't know. I'm just going to chalk it up as a coincidence. This story takes place in the town where I still live today. I was 9 years old at the time, and I had just moved into a new house. I was eager to explore, so I made friends with two kids, Bob and Billy. Don't worry, those aren't their real names. One day, we decided to walk down to the river in our shorts and t-shirts, hoping to jump into the water. We carefully made our way through the trees and bushes, making sure to watch out for rattlesnakes, which were common in the area. We walked pretty far down into the riverbed, trying to avoid being seen, since we weren't allowed to swim there when the river was full. Once we were far enough, we all jumped in, laughing at the fact we were doing something we weren't supposed to, though looking back, I know it was a pretty childish reason to laugh. But as soon as I stepped into the riverbed, I started feeling uneasy. It was this strange, eerie sensation like someone was watching us, following us as we moved closer to the water. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it stuck with me, growing stronger the closer we got. I was the last one to jump into the river, and when I did, it hit me all at once, this horrible, cold feeling. I kept telling the guys that I wanted to leave, but they just kept asking why. I couldn't explain to them that I felt this evil presence. I knew they'd think I was crazy. Since I couldn't convince them to leave, and I didn't know the way back to my house, I was stuck there. So I tried to ignore the feeling, thinking I could push through it. That was until I saw that. Bob and Billy were wrestling in the strong water, and I was just standing there, watching them. Then I heard something behind me. I turned my head, but there was nothing there. Maybe it was just a rattlesnake, I thought. So I turned back and focused on the guys. But then, I heard it again. I turned my head again, and this time, I saw it. It was a figure, completely black, from head to toe. It wasn't a shadow. It was solid. It was just standing there, watching me. I couldn't make out any details, no face, nothing. Just pure blackness. I was terrified. I didn't know who or what it was. I screamed, and before I even thought, I jumped into the river. Why did I do that? Honestly, I have no idea. It was just a reaction. I was small for my age, still am sadly, and I kept sinking under the water, too freaked out to swim properly. But the figure didn't go away. It stayed there, even as I was in the water. Bob and Billy heard me scream and quickly rushed over to help me. They could stand in the river, so they held me up, making sure I didn't drown. I could still see that black figure standing there. "What's wrong?" they kept asking. I pointed in the direction of the figure. "What is it?" they asked again, looking in that direction, but they didn't see anything. I was still shaking, and I fell into the water again. When I came back up, the figure was gone. It hadn't moved or done anything. It just stood there staring at me. And for some reason, I was the only one who could see it. We quickly scrambled out of the water and ran back up to the trail. When Bob and Billy asked me what happened, I didn't want to seem crazy. So I just told them I saw a couple of rattlesnakes ready to strike. They believed me, and we never talked about it again. Even now, I still go down to that riverbed, though I'm not scared anymore. The black figure may have seemed evil, but it didn't do anything. It just watched. I still feel that same strange presence when I go down there, but I've never seen the figure again. Average. About 2 weeks before the school year ended, my class went on a spiritual retreat. It was one of the last things we'd do together before graduation. The retreat took place in an old house built in the 1930s. It had once belonged to a wealthy family, but after about 30 years, they sold it to a group of nuns who turned it into a convent. A few years later, the nuns set up a graveyard right next to the house. There were rumors that the house was haunted, but I didn't believe any of them when I first arrived. The house felt warm and inviting, and there didn't seem to be anything unusual about it at all. The first part of the retreat was focused on meditation. We were supposed to leave behind all our worries and bad thoughts. As we meditated, I could hear some odd sounds coming from upstairs, but I brushed them off, thinking they were just the usual creaks and groans of an old house. Afterward, we broke into smaller groups to discuss some topics. Each group went into a different room for more privacy. There were 7 groups in total. My group ended up in the only room downstairs. It had no windows, and the air inside felt heavy and still. After about 10 minutes, we all started to feel a little uncomfortable. It was like the room had grown colder, and we exchanged looks, silently wondering if anyone else felt the same way. Then, out of nowhere, a strong breeze rushed through the room, sending our papers flying. The wind seemed to come from the closet, so I opened it, looking for anything that could have caused it, a vent or a fan, maybe. But there was nothing but a few old jackets and a hat. We all just frowned, puzzled, but continued with our discussion. During lunch, we told the rest of the group what had happened, trying to come up with a logical explanation. But as we shared our story, someone from another group spoke up. They had experienced something strange too. Their room had no windows either, and the door had been shut tight. While they were talking, the door had suddenly slammed open, and the room had turned freezing cold. That's when my friend Kyle and I decided to do a little investigating. We went upstairs and picked a room to explore. We started joking around, asking things like, "Is anyone here with us? Would you like to show yourself?" But nothing happened, so we just laughed it off. Then Kyle said, "Please, slam a door if you don't like us being in here." But again, nothing happened, so we left the room. Kyle went down the hall toward the bathroom, and I went into the room at the end of the hall, the one where the door had opened by itself earlier. I walked around the room for a bit, humming softly to myself. Suddenly, there was a strong gust of wind, and the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped, my heart racing. I knew it wasn't Kyle. He was still at the other end of the hall. I ran over and yanked the door open. Kyle was standing there, staring at me with wide eyes. Without saying a word, we both bolted down the stairs and out the front door into the lunch area. At the end of the retreat, as we were heading to the cars to go back to school, I looked up at the window in the living room. The curtain shifted slightly, and for a split second, I saw a little girl's face peering out at me. Then, just as quickly, she vanished. I'm still not sure if what I experienced was truly paranormal, but it was definitely strange. During college, I spent some time living at my grandparents' house. It wasn't the cleanest place, but it was free, and I was helping them out. Their house was right next door to the house I grew up in, the same house where I'd had so many ghostly experiences I would rather forget. I had been living there for a couple of months, and was just getting settled in when I decided to do a bit of meditation before bed to help calm down. But while I was meditating, I kept getting this nagging feeling that I should stop. I didn't see why at the time, so I kept going. Big mistake. If you ever get the feeling that you've gone too far in your meditation and something's telling you to stop, please listen. After finishing, I prepared to go to bed. I felt a little off, like I was coming down with something, but I figured I had just overdone it with the meditation. No more than 5 minutes after lying down, I saw her. The little girl. The one I hadn't seen in the 2 years since I left the house I grew up in. "We found you," she said to me. I nearly shot out of the covers. My heart raced. This was not good. I could feel that this was going to be the worst night of my life, worse than any of the paranormal experiences I had before. I was staring at the little girl, barely able to make out any detail besides her face and her small, childlike form. But that message, "We found you," it pulsed through me, through my blood. Then the others appeared. A man and a little person, both of them figures from my youth, also appeared. They weren't speaking, but they radiated a feeling, an unsettling, creepy happiness. And all of them, in their own way, were sending the same message. "We found you." I was frozen with fear, unsure of what to do. I considered waking my grandparents, but I couldn't. My grandmother had schizophrenia, and there was no way I could explain this to my grandfather without him thinking I was losing it. By this point, my room felt crowded. It was like it was filled with spirits, all of them trying to reach me, trying to make their presence known. I can still remember the pressure in the room, but it was concentrated on my half of the bed. It felt like something was sitting on me, like I was trapped in a bubble, and I couldn't escape. Terrified, I called my best friend. I told him to come over now. He'd had his own encounters with ghosts when he was younger, so I knew he'd understand. I turned the light on and unlocked the front door, but even as I did, that feeling, like the room was alive with unwanted attention, didn't fade. My friend showed up quickly and sat with me on the bed. He suggested I try going back to sleep, so we turned the light off again. But even in the dark, they were still there, only now they weren't talking to me. My friend could feel it too. The room was heavy, full of that same pressure. We tried to ignore it, tried to get some sleep. They didn't like that. There was a tapping on the window, then a tap on the bedpost. My friend turned to me and asked, "Can you stop tapping your fingernail on the bed?" But I wasn't tapping. It just kept going, tapping, tapping, tapping. We didn't say anything about it after that, but neither of us could deny it. Then we heard something from outside. He said it sounded like a small plane flying close by, but I thought it sounded more like a subway train rumbling past, deep and loud. It continued in fits and starts through the night, as though the world outside had fallen out of sync. We didn't get any real sleep until very late in the night, both of us exhausted, barely able to keep our eyes open. When the morning finally came, the feeling was gone. Just like that, everything had stopped. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It was the worst, most intense experience I'd ever had with the paranormal. It felt like something was trying to drag me back, and it left me shaken. I moved out of my grandparents' house shortly after that night, and I haven't spent another night there since. To this day, it remains the most terrifying experience I've ever had. This happened 8 years ago when I was 17. I was in the middle of my rebellious teenage years, hanging out with the wrong crowd, doing things I shouldn't have been doing, like using drugs. My best friend, Lola, and I worked at the same deli shop. She was the manager, so we spent a lot of time together. Lola lived with her boyfriend, Robbie, who was also a manager at the deli, and the three of us were inseparable. We partied a lot, staying up for days on end, throwing wild nights at their apartment with music, people, and no real care for the consequences. One night, it was just the three of us, Lola, Robbie, and me. We were high, listening to the Godsmack CE. If you know Godsmack, you know their lyrics are dark, often dealing with themes of the occult, and their music hits hard. We were especially into one of the tracks, Voodoo, as we spiraled further down into our own heads, talking about crazy stuff, our minds tangling with the music. We stayed up all night, getting lost in it. The next night I went home, completely exhausted, and fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up at 3 a.m., but something was off. I couldn't move. It was like my body was frozen, and the terror crept in immediately. I'd had sleep paralysis before, so I knew the drill. My mom had always told me to pray that it would go away, and it usually worked. But this time, it didn't. I was lying on my side, facing the stereo I had left turned off. But it was on now, and the lights were flashing across the display. It read 3 a.m., and that's when I noticed something even more terrifying. The stereo was unplugged. I could see the back of it, and the cable was completely disconnected from the wall. Panic surged through me. I tried to scream, to call out for my parents, but nothing more than a whisper came out. I was trapped, unable to move, unable to make a sound. It felt like I was paralyzed in every sense of the word. I couldn't even break free from the grip of fear that had taken hold of me. After what felt like an eternity, I somehow snapped out of it. I jumped out of bed, trying to get to the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had locked itself from the other side. Suddenly, I felt a force, like something was pushing me back onto the bed. I didn't have the strength to fight it. I just laid there, waiting for the night to pass. I couldn't even keep my eyes open anymore, and I must have eventually fallen asleep. When I woke up in the morning, it was light outside, and everything seemed normal again. But I couldn't shake what had happened. The next day at work, I told Lola what I had experienced. I'll never forget the way her face changed when I finished. It was like a mixture of shock and recognition. She told me that she and Robbie had the exact same experience that night, around the same time. They hadn't told me about it before, but they had both been paralyzed with strange things happening in the room, just like I had experienced. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to keep partying. I don't know why, but something in me shifted. I felt like I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. To this day, I believe that listening to that Godsmack CD had something to do with what happened. I don't think sleep paralysis is just a medical condition. In my gut, I believe there was something darker at play that night, something paranormal, something demonic. I stopped listening to that album, and I never partied like that again. Whatever had happened to Lola, Robbie, and me, it felt like we had attracted something we couldn't handle, and I've never forgotten that feeling. I'm 14 now, but I first started experiencing strange things when I was around 9 or 10 years old. It all started one night when I couldn't fall asleep. I was just lying there staring at the ceiling, trying to clear my mind. Then, for some reason, I turned my head and saw something that made my heart race. There, curled up against the wall, was what looked like a little girl. She was in a ball, like she was hiding or sleeping. I was so scared that I quickly shut my eyes, turned to the other side, and pulled the blankets over my head. I tried to calm myself down and eventually fell asleep, but I didn't tell anyone about it. A few weeks later, I was in the bathroom, washing my feet. When I looked up, I froze. There, outside the window, was someone staring right at me. I panicked and ran out so fast that I slipped on the wet floor. I told my mom what happened, but like most parents, she didn't believe me. I tried to forget about it, but then it happened again. This time, I was using the bathroom again. Yeah, kind of embarrassing. And I heard footsteps. I ran out quickly, and this time I told my dad. He believed me. He grabbed a flashlight, and I followed him to the back of the house. But when we got there was no one. No footprints. Nothing. I started to wonder, was it someone messing around outside, or was it something else? After that, we moved to a new place. I didn't think much about the strange events until one day when I went to my grandma's house. We had only been there for about 3 hours when we came back home and heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. My dad went in first. It was the blender. It was on. We quickly turned it off and checked to see if it was hot, thinking maybe one of us had left it on. But it wasn't hot at all, and no one was home except my dog, who can barely reach the counter. That's when I really started to get uneasy. Another time, my mom was trying to open the bathroom door, and suddenly, it slammed shut from the inside. She was freaked out, but we brushed it off, It was probably just the wind, even though it wasn't strong enough to slam a door like that. Fast forward to when I was 13. My mom had gone to Mexico, and I had to stay at my grandma's house, someone I didn't get along with very well. It was around 3 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I suddenly heard footsteps in the kitchen, but these weren't normal footsteps. They sounded like someone walking in high heels. I got scared, but I just went back to sleep, hoping it was nothing. 2 months ago, it happened again. It was about 2 in the morning. I went to the bathroom, and again, I heard footsteps in the kitchen, but when I got there, no one was there. I don't know what to think anymore. The most recent thing happened just last week. I was at my aunt's house, and I was closing the bedroom door when, out of nowhere, the door slammed shut on its own. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like this follows me everywhere I go. What do you think? Have you ever had something like this happen to you? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I used to live in California, and while the ghosts in my current house aren't too bad, they're nothing compared to what we experienced in my parents' old house in Calgary. We recently moved into a new place, and over the past few months, I've been keeping track of some odd things that happen here. Every day around 5:30 to 6 o'clock p.m., the toilet in the main floor bathroom flushes on its own. One evening, while I was making dinner, my fiancée, Jerry, went to use the bathroom. She came out, looking a bit shaken, and told me what happened. She said that while she was in there, she felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air became cold, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She was about to sit down when the toilet flushed by itself. Afterward, she said she felt a cool breeze, even though there are no windows in that bathroom, and the temperature seemed to return to normal. We think my brother's room is the most haunted one in the house. He's had his share of strange experiences. If you've read my earlier story, you'd know what I mean. He says sometimes he'll wake up to feel his bed gently rocking back and forth. Other times, he feels a weight at the foot of his bed, like someone sitting there. When he's home from school and heads upstairs to do his homework, he cranks his stereo. But sometimes, the CD changes tracks for no reason, or the volume suddenly adjusts on its own. When he gets up to fix it, he'll turn around to find that his books and homework are on the floor. Poor guy has been through so much, but I think he's just gotten used to it and tries to ignore it. Still, I can often hear him up there, muttering in frustration about something. As for me, I've had my own experience. One night, I was out in the garage working on my bikes. I had a race coming up that weekend, so I was double-checking everything to make sure the bikes were in top shape. I was waiting for my mechanic, Grant, to stop by so he could take a look at them. When he arrived, he asked me, "Who's the little girl sitting on your front step?" I thought maybe it was just one of the neighbor's kids, so I got up to check. But when I looked around the corner, there was no one there. However, I did spot a little pink ball at the bottom of the steps. I figured it must belong to one of the neighbors, so I took it and dropped it off at the house a few doors down. Grant and I worked on the bikes for a while, talking about the race and who our toughest competition would be, when we both heard a giggle coming from the driveway. We jumped up and checked, but again, there was no one around. When we went back into the garage, we were both a little freaked out to find the pink ball sitting right next to my toolbox. We exchanged a look, and neither of us had any idea how the ball had gotten there. It was like something was playing with us. We left the ball there while we finished working on the bikes. After Grant left, I picked it up and kicked it into the backyard. The strange thing is, no matter how much we moved the ball, it always ended up back in the same spot in the back corner of the yard, unless I mowed the lawn. After I cut the grass, the ball would disappear for a while, but it always returned to its spot afterward. We think there was a little girl who used to live here, and now she's just playing around and causing a bit of trouble, even when we're here. We don't mind her though. She's a bit of a troublemaker at times. She'll mess with Chris' stereo, play with my theater system, and even move Jerry's makeup around when she's not looking. It's strange, but kind of amusing too. We just learned to live with it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story is based on real events that happened to me, my sister Casey, and my friend Sam. It all started when I was in preschool. My family had just moved into an apartment in Alameda. The first night there, Casey and I heard music coming from the closet. At the same time, we heard what sounded like someone rollerblading on the ceiling. A week later, strange things kept happening. Ants started coming out of the bathtub, crawling along the kitchen wall, and even appearing in my bedroom closet. Then, on the night of May 1st, things got worse. My dad was away at sea, and my mom was working the late shift at McDonald's. Around midnight, Casey and I heard loud arguing in the hallway. Then, screaming. Right after that, we saw something staring at us. Two glowing, blood-red eyes. We screamed and hid under our covers for the rest of the night. A year later, we moved to Concord. But whatever was haunting us, it followed. Not long after we settled in, I started hearing crying sounds coming from the attic. That's when I knew it was still with us. Over time, strange flashes of light appeared, doors slammed shut on their own, and people got hurt in unexplained ways. But the scariest moment came right before we moved out. That night, I looked out my bedroom window and saw a man holding a knife. I rushed outside to the backyard to see if he was really there, and he was, but something about him wasn't right. As I stepped toward him, he moved back. He kept backing away until he reached the fence, and then he disappeared. We thought moving would help. In 1999, we settled in Oakley. At first, everything seemed normal, but exactly 1 year later, on May 1st, it started again. That night, my best friend Sam was sleeping over. We both heard footsteps in the crawl space beneath my apartment. A year or two later, my sister's friend, Big Sam, was in the kitchen helping me with the dishes when a glass slid across the counter and smashed onto the floor. That same night, the power went out. Casey and Big Sam were upstairs while I was downstairs. That's when we all heard it. Loud, heavy footsteps, like someone in boots walking on a hardwood floor. But our house had carpet. When we moved to Brentwood, everything escalated. Loud banging and scraping sounds came from the windows and walls. My computer kept turning on and off by itself. My bed shook at night. It got so bad that I couldn't even sleep in my own room anymore. Then one night, I had enough. I decided to bless my room, the place where everything started. As soon as I began, my light flickered, my TV went crazy, and my computer glitched. The bed started shaking. A sudden wind tore through my room, throwing my papers and clothes around like a tornado. And then, everything stopped. The heaviness was gone. The fear lifted. That's when I knew I got my life back. Or so I thought. A year of silence passed. But on March 20, 2007, my birthday, everything returned. At midnight, just as I was about to fall asleep, something woke me. Knocking sounds came from my closet doors. The next day, I called Casey and told her what happened. She hesitated before admitting something. "I forgot to tell you," she said. "Big Sam and I used a board. We contacted a girl. She was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, and she hates men." At first, I laughed. A ghost that hates guys? It sounded ridiculous, but I shouldn't have laughed. That night, I was home alone, watching Full House when, bam, my backpack flew across the room and hit me in the head. Right after that, the hallway lights flickered. Then, screaming, from inside my bedroom. I ran to check, but when I opened the door, I froze. Things were flying around the room. My TV screen glitched wildly. My computer, which had been broken for months, suddenly died again. Then I looked into my mirror, and I saw a face. A woman's face with 3 deep knife cuts along her cheek. I grabbed my blankets and slept in the living room, and from that night on, I refused to sleep in my room. Then things turned violent. At school, something tripped me, even though my friends were several feet away. Another time, I stayed inside during class to catch up on work. I saw smoke rising over the classroom door, but when the teacher checked, there was nothing there. Later, while reading outside with my class, something shoved me hard, again, with no one near me. At home, the attacks continued. One night, I was brushing my teeth when the bathroom door wouldn't open, like someone was holding it shut. I pulled hard, and when it finally flew open, I fell backward and hit my head on the sink. Another night, I was reading in bed when my light went out. Then I heard moaning from under my bed. I leaned over to look. Nothing. But as I tried to sit up, I couldn't move. Something was holding me down. I started praying, and just like that, it stopped. My light turned back on. The worst moment came in December. It was midnight, and I was sending an email to Casey when I started hearing voices. I looked around, trying to find where they were coming from. Then I realized the sound was coming from my dead computer. When I leaned in closer, I got shocked. That's when I knew this wasn't just a ghost. This was something worse. Days later, I started seeing a little boy. He seemed to be trying to tell me something. The last time I saw him, a massive tornado hit Greensburg, Kansas. I started to wonder, was I seeing things before they happened? Then one night the boy appeared again. This time, I could finally hear him. He warned me, if you keep looking for answers, something bad will happen to you. Before I could ask him what he meant, he looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "She's coming." Then he vanished. That night, I tried reaching out to him again, but something else came through instead. "Give up," she hissed. "You'll never free them. They'll be trapped forever, and you'll die trying." The next morning, I left a note in my room asking the boy who she was and why he was afraid of her. When I checked the paper later, there was an answer. "She's my sister. She hated me, but I loved her. When she died, I couldn't let her go." I asked him how she died. "Her ex-boyfriend killed her," he answered. "She was 19. Right after that, my yearbook flew across the room, barely missing my head. That night, I finally learned the truth. The boy had drowned himself in a creek near my house. "Why?" I asked. "Because I wanted to be with her." I cried. Days later, she came back. She wanted me gone. The walls shook. The doors slammed. My room was a storm of flying objects. Then she appeared, staring at me with those evil eyes. I backed up, reaching for the crucifix on my wall. The second I touched it, she vanished. I knew then I couldn't fight her alone. So I called a friend who was a priest. We performed an exorcism, and when we did, the house exploded with chaos. Lights flickered, screams echoed, the walls shook. My friend collapsed. I carried him as we ran for the door. One by one, every door slammed shut behind us. But the moment we stepped outside, a bright light burst from every window. Then, silence. The heaviness was gone. The fear was gone. And finally, after years of terror, it was over. It all started when I was 10 years old, in the summer of 1982. My family had flown from Pennsylvania to California to visit my aunt and cousins. I'd never had any paranormal experiences before this, so the idea of anything spooky never crossed my mind when I stayed at their house. I had no hesitation about the place. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The room I stayed in belonged to my cousin, and it had a very large clown painted on the wall. At the time, I wasn't afraid of clowns, just indifferent. It wasn't something I thought much about, and the room itself didn't feel weird, aside from the bizarre decoration. The lights were controlled by a dimmer switch next to the door. You'd push it in to turn the light on, then adjust it to make the room brighter or dimmer. For some reason, my cousin, brother, and I decided to sleep on the floor that night, leaving the bed empty. Just a kid thing, I guess. In the middle of the night, I woke up and noticed something strange. The light in the room was getting brighter than normal. I lay there, trying to figure out what was going on. After a while, it started dimming again, gradually getting darker. The change was subtle but noticeable. The dimmer switch was right next to the door, and I expected to see my aunt or parents standing there, checking on us. But the door remained firmly shut. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't bring myself to wake up my brother or cousin. I just laid there, eyes fixed on the switch, too scared to look anywhere else. The clown seemed so close, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked away from the switch, it would be watching me. It felt like the light kept changing for hours, but in reality, it was probably just a few minutes. Still, it was the longest and most terrifying wait of my life. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Maybe it was a malfunctioning light, but I've never heard of a light getting both brighter and dimmer on its own like that. I even questioned whether I really woke up, but the vividness of the experience, the fear and the details, has stayed with me. Ever since that night, I've been terrified of clowns. Flash forward 20 plus years. I was in California again for a business trip and decided to stay at my aunt's house for a few days before starting work. By now, I completely pushed the memory of that night from my mind, so much so that I fell asleep quickly when I arrived. But as always happens when I fly from the East Coast to the West, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, wide awake. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back to sleep, so I decided to go watch TV in the family room. The room was far from the bedrooms, so I figured I wouldn't disturb anyone. To get there, I had to walk down the hallway, past the bedrooms and through the den. As soon as I entered the den, I froze. There's no other way to describe it. I just couldn't make myself go any further into the room. There was a couch to the right, and though I didn't look at it directly, I could feel that something, or someone, was there watching me. I don't even know why I felt that way, but it was a gut-wrenching, overwhelming fear. I couldn't explain it. I didn't hesitate. I ran through the room, not once glancing at the couch, and made it into the living room, where I immediately turned on every light and the TV. Everything felt normal once I was in there, but I couldn't shake the sense of dread I'd felt. I spent the next few hours trying to calm myself, thinking that maybe I was subconsciously thinking about my childhood experience and it was affecting me. Still, the fear didn't make sense. Later that morning, my aunt joined me in the living room. We had never spoken about anything paranormal, and I wasn't sure how she felt about such things, but eventually, I told her everything. The experience from 20-some years ago and what had happened that morning. To my surprise, she didn't brush it off. She told me that when they first moved into the house, she had a vivid dream of two shadowy figures sitting on the couch in the den. She said the figures weren't clearly defined but looked like black shapes. The most unsettling part of the dream was that both figures appeared to be holding cigarettes, with the glowing tips visible in the darkness. At that moment, my skin crawled. I never knew that she had experienced something so similar in that house. To this day, I can't decide whether my experiences were just a combination of overactive imagination and some electrical issues with the lights, or if there was something more to it. The second experience, feeling that overwhelming fear in the den, seems easier to dismiss because it was all based on feelings, not actual visible evidence. But I know one thing for sure. If I had it to do over again, I'd still run through that room as fast as I could. I couldn't face whatever was there. I've lived in several places since then, some much older than that house, and I've never had any other experiences like this. Whatever was in that house remains a mystery to me, and I'm not sure I even want to know the truth. In 2002, my world turned upside down when my husband took his own life. Our son, just 8 months old, had no way of understanding the tragedy. I decided to move back to California to start over, and for a while, we stayed with my parents in their basement. It wasn't ideal, but it gave us a place to land while I got my feet back under me. By the time my son was 18 months old, we found our own home. We were both excited. He finally had his own room, and I hoped this new house would give us the fresh start we so badly needed. At first, everything seemed fine, but within the first week, my son, who had always slept in his own bed, started insisting on sleeping with me. At first, I thought it was just the new house, the unfamiliar sounds and smells. I figured he'd grow out of it. But when I tried to get him to sleep in his room, something changed. If I laid down beside him, he'd fall asleep, but it wasn't the same anymore. One night, I woke up to him shaking me, his little voice trembling as he said, "The man in my room won't let me sleep." I jumped out of bed in a panic. My mind raced. Was someone in the house? The dogs should have been barking, but they were eerily quiet. I rushed into my son's room. There were no signs of a break-in, but my 3 dogs were growling at nothing, staring into the corner of the room. I turned on all the lights, searching the house, but there was no man to be found. The dogs wouldn't stop growling, so my son and I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, with the dogs curled up at our feet like they were guarding us. For the next year, my son refused to sleep in his room. The man terrified him, and the dogs insisted on sleeping with us every night. I started to feel uneasy in the house. It felt heavy, like something was always watching. The dogs would sometimes bark and growl at nothing, as if they were cornering something unseen. One night, they even ran straight at the sliding glass door, barking like mad. When I opened the door, they charged into the house, running straight to my son's room and stopping dead in their tracks, growling. Through it all, my son always insisted that he had brothers. He'd play with them in the yard, making up games like hide and seek, even when it was raining outside. He told me they wanted me to be their mommy too. But these brothers seemed to get him into trouble. Things would break, objects would be moved around, and my son would tell me that his brothers had done it. He'd say they were always trying to get him into trouble. It was strange, but what really unsettled me was when he said his brothers were mean and often got mad at him. When I asked him their names, he said they wouldn't tell him. At the time, he was only 2.5 years old. A couple of years later, after I remarried and moved again, things seemed to settle down. But the unease didn't leave entirely. My son was still afraid to sleep alone, and he developed a fear of the dark. The dogs would bark at nothing, as if they sensed something I couldn't. Then, the brothers returned. This time, they seemed to disturb my husband, who was struggling to understand what was happening. My son's ceiling fan would start to spin slowly in reverse, without anyone touching it. I asked my son if he used something, like a broom, to spin it. He said, "No, the man did it." The man. He was back. Now that my son was older, I asked him what the man looked like. He said the man looked just like a regular man with brown hair. My heart sank. Over the years, I've wondered if the spirit of my late husband was somehow trying to contact our son. I would often tell my husband, wherever he was, if it was him causing trouble for our son, to stop. I'd tell him that our son was scared, and I'd ask him to protect him. But sometimes, I'm not sure if it's my husband's spirit or something else. Now my daughter is starting to say the same thing. She wakes up at night, saying the man won't let her sleep. My husband is still unsure of what to believe. He was raised to think that things like this just don't happen. He's never experienced anything like this, and it's hard for him to grasp. I tried smudging the house, especially when I'm home alone. Afterward, things seemed to quiet down for a while. But there's still something about the house, something I can't quite shake. I've asked my spirit guide for help, to protect us and keep us safe. I still don't have the answers, but something is here, and I can't help but wonder, what do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Growing up wasn't always easy. When I was 5, my family moved into a house in the San Fernando Valley. It was the first time I had my very own room, and I was excited. The house seemed nice at first, but it wasn't long before things started to feel strange. On the 3rd night we were there, I went to bed like usual. I left my bedroom door open, just in case I wanted to go sleep with my parents. I was lying in bed, waiting to fall asleep, when something made me look up. There, just under the doorway, was the figure of a little boy. He was glowing white, almost like a soft light. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me. I froze. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed with fear. The only thing I could do was pull the covers over my head, shut my eyes, and hope it would all go away. I must have eventually fallen asleep because when I woke up, everything was quiet again. The next morning, I ran to my brother's room and told him what I had seen. He said it was just my imagination. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me either. I felt angry and scared, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had seen was real. I was so afraid of what happened that I decided never to sleep in that room again. From then on, I shared a room with my brother. Not long after, we rented out the bedroom to a woman with her child, and then we moved again, this time to an apartment in Canaga Park. I was relieved to be away from the house, but even in the new apartment, things still felt off sometimes. One night, while my mom was asleep beside me in their bed, I woke up. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I just lay there. After a while, I decided to sit up. That's when I felt it, a cold, heavy feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked around and saw the shadow of a tall man wearing a hat, standing in the corner of the room. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My heart raced, but I managed to pull the covers over my head and close my eyes. The next morning, I told my mom about the shadow man, but she didn't believe me. I knew what I had seen was real. It wasn't just my imagination, but I never saw the tall man again, and I hoped that whatever was there had finally left. We moved once more, this time to an apartment in Laurel Canyon. I was 8 now, but the strange things didn't stop. One day, when I was alone at home, I went to the kitchen to get something to drink. When I came back to my room, I felt something was off. It felt like someone was watching me again. I looked around but saw nothing. It kept happening. Everywhere I went, I felt like someone was behind me. I had to keep checking over my shoulder when I walked through the hallway. I was scared to even be in the bathroom alone, so I left the door open whenever I went in. Everyone thought I was just being silly, but I couldn't help how I felt. My mom always told me there was no such thing as ghosts, and if I believed in God, nothing bad would happen to me. But the feeling never went away. Eventually, we moved into our own house in Palmdale. I was 10 by then, and we had lived there for 8 years. It was in this house where the strange happenings started to happen more often. I would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was home, doors opening and closing by themselves, lights flickering, and even the TV in the living room turning on by itself when no one was there. I would also hear loud bangs on my bedroom window. I heard them during the day and at night, even when I was sleeping. My brother witnessed the bang on my parents' bedroom window once. He was lying on their bed, watching TV, when suddenly a loud bang came from the window. He jumped up and looked, but there was nothing there. He even went outside to check, but nothing could explain the noise. It didn't stop there. One day, while I was at my desk in my room, I felt someone behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. I shrugged it off, but then it happened again. This time, it felt like a little hand touched my cheek. I looked around, but again, no one was there. Over time, it started to happen more often, but I got used to it. It didn't scare me anymore. Then things got even stranger. I started to hear a woman's voice calling my name. At first, I thought it was my mom. She would often call me to help her with something, but when I'd ask her what she needed, she'd say she hadn't called me. It started happening more and more often. It wasn't just a coincidence. I decided to figure out where the voice was coming from. One day, when I was listening to music, I heard the voice again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the hallway outside my room. I opened the door and looked, but there was no one there. I went back into my room, and then I heard it again, this time from behind me. I froze. I ran out of my room and straight to my mom. That was the moment I think she started to believe me. She told my dad and brother, but they didn't believe me. They said, "Why haven't we heard anything? Why is it always you?" I didn't have an answer. I started asking myself the same questions. Why was I the only one experiencing this? Why did the ghosts always come to me? More time passed, and the incidents kept happening. One night, I was taking a shower in my parents' bathroom. It had those sliding doors with the frosted glass. I was washing my hair when I happened to open my eyes. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing behind the door. I froze. But when I looked again, there was no one there. The door was locked. It had looked like a little boy, maybe wearing a blue shirt and jeans. I told my mom, but all she said was, "Just believe in God." The little girl who had been touching me was also a part of these experiences. One day, I saw her. She was wearing a white dress with light brown curly hair, smiling at me. I just smiled back and walked away. I think she liked me and hung around my room because of all the girly things I had. Then just before Thanksgiving, I heard a little boy crying. I was in the living room, and my mom was at the kitchen table. I asked her if she heard it too, and she said yes. It sounded like it was coming from behind me, but when we looked, there was no one there. I believe the woman calling my name was a family member who had passed away. I think she was here to look after me, though I'm not sure why. Some people say ghosts come to me because they need help. Maybe they want me to listen to what they're trying to say. And so, I know this won't be the last of the ghosts I encounter. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was 6 years old, my family moved into a house in the East Bay of California. It was the 1980s, and the house was only 4 years old with just one previous tenant. At first, everything seemed fine. I slept in a room across the hall from my parents, and if anything happened, I could yell to get their attention, but that peace didn't last long. One night, about a year after moving in, we heard a loud thud at the front door around 11 p.m. My dad went to check it out, but when he opened the door, no one was there. At the base of the doormat, though, was a chicken, its head cut off. My parents, who came from a superstitious background, recognized it immediately for what it was, an attempt to invoke evil spirits into our home. We had no idea who would want to do this, but it was clear they didn't want us there. 2 months later, I woke up one night to find a tall woman in a white dress staring into my closet. I thought I was dreaming, but after rubbing my eyes and pinching myself, I realized it was real. I was so scared, I didn't scream. I just lay back down and tried to sleep. The next night, I slept with my parents, and when I told them what happened, they mentioned it might be the result of the voodoo, but at my young age, I was skeptical. I should have listened to that feeling, because things got worse. A few months later, I woke up again, and this time, a transparent woman with white hair was standing right beside my bed. She looked demonic, and the moonlight shined right through her. Her hand reached out toward me. I was wide awake, but when I tried to wake my parents, they wouldn't stir. I was so terrified, I passed out from fear. My parents had the house blessed, but that only worked for a little while. Soon, the strange occurrences started up again, and this time, everyone in my family was experiencing them. My sister, who was 16 months younger than me, went into the backyard one night to feed our dog. She looked up and saw misty forms reaching toward her. Terrified, she ran back inside to tell my parents. There were other, smaller things like black figures stepping in front of us during meals or strange, cold drafts. The whole family would see them, and my parents would ask, "Did you see that?" And we'd all say yes. Eventually, it became part of life. But then, there were the truly terrifying events. One night, my mom was saying goodbye to some family friends when something brushed up against her and went inside the house. There was no one there. At a New Year's party, we heard 3 loud knocks on the glass door in the backyard. We were all standing in front of it, but when we looked outside, no one was there. Then there were the knocks on the front door late at night, which got so frequent we stopped answering. The scariest event, though, happened when I was alone. One night, I woke up and felt completely out of control of my body. I began speaking words I didn't recognize, and my body started moving on its own. I couldn't stop it. It felt like I was possessed. There was also the time when my uncle was visiting, and I had to sleep by my parents. In the middle of the night, I woke up to see something crawling toward me. It was evil, foul-looking, but I couldn't describe it. All I knew was that it terrified me. But perhaps the most disturbing incident was when I took a shower. The water became scalding hot, even though I turned the cold water on full blast. I got burned. My babysitter tried to fix it, but when we checked the water heater, the heat knob was turned all the way up. The bottles in front of the heater were all in place, meaning no one could have physically moved it. The heat had been adjusted by something, or someone, else. So many other things happened in that house that I can't even remember them all. We lived there for 6 years before we moved, but to this day, I can't sleep with the lights off. That house left me deeply traumatized, and I don't think I'll ever fully be able to shake those memories. When I was a child, I lived in a house in the East Bay of California. It was the 1980s, and the house was relatively new. My parents had bought it from the original owners, and it seemed like an ideal place to settle down. I had a room across the hall from my parents, so I always felt safe. If anything ever happened, I could call out and they'd be right there. But after we'd been there for a little over a year, things started to feel different. One evening, around 11 p.m., we all heard a loud thud at the front door. My father, being the one to check things out, went to the door. He opened it, but there was no one there. However, when he looked down, there was a chicken. Its head was completely chopped off, lying on the doormat. My parents, coming from a very superstitious background, knew immediately what this meant. It wasn't just a prank. Someone had deliberately left it there to try and bring something dark into our home. We never knew who would do such a thing, but we couldn't ignore the feeling that they didn't want us there. A couple of months later, I woke up one night, feeling a chill in the air. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I looked toward my closet. There, standing still in the shadows, was a tall woman in a white dress, staring directly into the closet. I blinked, thinking I was dreaming, but when I pinched myself and felt the sharp sting, I knew this wasn't a dream. It was real. I was so scared that I couldn't even scream. Instead, I just turned over and tried to sleep again, hoping it would go away. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened. They seemed concerned, but they also suggested it might be related to the strange things that had happened around the house, maybe even tied to the chicken incident. I was still skeptical, but deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. A few months after that first sighting, it happened again. This time, I woke up in the middle of the night to find a woman with white hair standing beside my bed. Her body was almost transparent, and the moonlight shone through her as if she wasn't entirely there. She reached out toward me, and I froze. I tried to call out for my parents, but my voice wouldn't work. I was paralyzed with fear. After what felt like an eternity, I passed out, my heart pounding in my chest. I told my parents what happened, and they decided to have the house blessed. For a little while, things seemed to calm down, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. They just changed. One night, my sister, who was a little younger than me, went outside to feed the dog. She came running back, terrified. She had seen misty forms in the backyard, reaching toward her. We had all started to notice things at this point, like dark figures that would appear in the corner of our vision, only to vanish when we looked directly at them. My parents even saw them. We'd all be sitting around the table, eating dinner, when suddenly, a black form would step into view, then move away. My parents would ask, "Did you see that?" And we'd all say, "Yes." It became so frequent that it wasn't surprising anymore, but it was still unsettling. One night, my mom was saying goodbye to some family friends outside. Something rubbed up against her, something that wasn't there. She quickly looked around, but no one was close enough to have touched her. Another time, during a New Year's Eve party, there were 3 loud knocks on the glass door in the backyard. We all rushed to the door to see who was there, but when we looked outside, no one was there. No one had come to the door. Then there were the knocks on the front door, late at night, when no one was around. Eventually, we stopped answering the door altogether. It didn't seem like anyone was out there anyway. One of the most terrifying experiences happened when I felt like I wasn't in control of my own body. I woke up one night and felt something taking over me. My body moved on its own, and words I didn't mean to say came out of my mouth. I couldn't stop it. and I felt completely helpless. Afterward, I couldn't even explain what happened. It was like something had taken over for a while. But it didn't end there. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw something crawling on the floor toward me. It looked wrong, something I can't describe, just foul and evil. I was frozen, not able to move or scream. Another time, while I was taking a shower, the water turned unbearably hot. I couldn't make it stop, no matter how much I turned the cold water up. My skin burned from the heat. My babysitter, who was with me at the time, tried to figure out what was going on, but when we checked the water heater, the knob was turned all the way up. There were no signs that anyone had been tampering with it, no one physical who could have moved it. Eventually, after living there for 6 years, we decided to leave. The strange occurrences had been too much, and none of us could explain what was happening. Even now, after all these years, I can't sleep without a light on. The memories of that house still haunt me. Sometimes I wonder if something was there all along, waiting for us to notice it. Have you ever had an experience like this? Something you couldn't explain. Sometimes, I think I'll never fully understand what happened in that house, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never forget it. It was around 10:30 p.m. when my family and I were sitting together in the kitchen, watching TV. Just a week before, we lost my grandma. The doctors had said she died from something they called stomach freeze, not brain freeze, like you'd get from eating ice cream too fast, but something much worse. The funeral was on Saturday, and ever since then, strange things have been happening around the house. We've been hearing weird noises late at night and seeing things we couldn't explain. That night, my parents had told everyone it was time to go to bed. Usually, my dad would shake his keychain to get my little brother to go to sleep. It was kind of a funny little trick he used to play, and it always worked. But that night, it wasn't the same. I remember it clearly. Me and my sisters were laughing and joking around, having fun as usual, when my dad shook his keys to get us to settle down. I was only about 5 or 6 years old at the time, so I didn't think much of it, but my little brother immediately got scared and went right to sleep, like he always did. After we all settled down, my dad went to bed on his own, since he didn't want to be distracted by all of us. My sisters, my little brother, and I all slept on a big king-size mattress. But I was always the last one to fall asleep, even now, and that night was no different. I was just about to close my eyes when I heard the sound of keys jingling. At first, I thought it was my dad, but then I realized he was already asleep. I could hear him snoring, so I called out, thinking maybe he was messing around. "Dad, stop shaking your keys," I said, but he responded, "I'm not shaking my keys." I thought he was joking, so I asked again, and again he said the same thing. I was starting to feel uneasy, so I woke my older sister up. She was still half asleep but said she could hear the keys jingling too. That made me even more nervous. I finally managed to fall asleep, but my older sister was still awake. We were both lying right below the window, and it was cold, so she pulled the blanket over our feet to stay warm. But then, something strange happened. The blanket suddenly pulled itself right off our feet, as if someone had lifted it. I was terrified now. We quickly covered our feet again, but this time, something else happened. It felt like someone was tickling our feet. We both thought it was our dad playing a trick, so we asked him to stop. But his voice came from across the room. "I'm not tickling your feet. I'm over here sleeping." We were scared out of our minds at this point. Neither of us knew what to do. I was too scared to move, so I pulled the blankets over my head, curling up tight. But my sister wasn't as scared of looking around. She sat up and glanced around the room. At first, she didn't see anything. But then, when she was about to lay back down, she saw it. At the end of the mattress, standing there, was a woman. She was wearing traditional Hmong clothes, the kind you wear for New Year or when someone dies. Her face was smiling, but there was something terribly wrong about her smile. Blood dripped from one side of her mouth, and her teeth were stained red. Her long black hair was messy, and she seemed to be staring at my sister. The ghost was slowly climbing onto the bed when my sister screamed. She screamed so loud that it woke everyone up. I was frozen with fear, and I couldn't stop crying. But I wasn't the only one. My little brother and my younger sisters were crying too. We all ran to my parents and told them everything we had seen. My parents were worried, so they went to my grandpa's house to ask for help. He told us that it was Grandma. She had come to visit because she missed us. Even though we were all scared, knowing it was Grandma made me feel a little better. I didn't fully understand what had happened, but I knew she was watching over us in some way. When I was living with the father of my child, I experienced a number of strange and unsettling events. The first and scariest happened at the first house we lived in. Eventually, we moved to a second house, which is where things started to get even stranger. At first, I didn't live in the second house, but after a few months, I joined my family there. By that time, our daughter, who was born early, was a year old. She was just starting to walk, and the house was big enough for her to practice moving around. My boyfriend and his family had been living there for a whole year before I moved in, and up until then, nothing unusual had happened. But after my grandma passed away and my boyfriend's youngest brother, Julian, was shot in the head and nearly died, I started to notice things, strange presences and cold spots around the house. But that's a story for another time. One day, while I was sitting in the living room, I noticed that my daughter had wandered off. She was just starting to walk, so she loved to roam the house. After a few minutes of not hearing her, I went to check on her. When I found her, she was standing in the doorway to Tammy's, my boyfriend's mom room, looking up at something, smiling and laughing. Of course, I looked around, but there was nothing there. Tammy was asleep in her bed, and no one else was home. I brought my daughter back to the living room, but from that point on, I started to notice that she would often be playing in that same doorway. It was as though she had a ghostly playmate, though she couldn't talk yet, so I never knew for sure. At first, I didn't think much of it. I didn't feel like the ghost was dangerous, but it still made me uneasy, especially being home alone. Over time, my daughter learned to run, and one day her cousin Jamia was over. The two of them were chasing each other from the front living room to the hallway, laughing and playing. I was cooking in the kitchen, keeping an eye on them. Then suddenly, both of them stopped in their tracks. They stood there in the living room, staring at something. I watched as they both turned their heads, looking past me and into the hallway. They started laughing again, and they ran off in that direction. I called out to Jamia and asked why they had stopped playing and what they were looking at. She just shrugged and said, "That boy, he's so crazy." Then she laughed and ran off, leaving me feeling even more unsettled. After a while, my daughter started to avoid the doorway to Tammy's room and instead became fascinated with the front living room. We had 2 living rooms in the house. The front one, where the incident with Jamia and Andrea happened, was more formal and decorated with white couches, photos, statues, and a bar. No one ever really used that room, but Andrea seemed to like going in there. She would often get up and wander into that front room, and she'd always head straight for the bar. I couldn't figure out how she knew how to open it, but she did. 3 times, she grabbed the wine glasses and broke them. We had to find a way to keep her out of that room, but she still tried to go in there when she could. Then one day, while I was in the kitchen, I glanced out the window into the front room. I saw someone behind me, tall and dark, walking past me and disappearing into the hallway. I turned to look and saw my friend William standing in the hallway, so I asked him to come into the living room to walk where I had seen the figure. As he walked in the same direction, I knew it couldn't have been him, because his reflection was visible, and he was wearing white, but the figure I saw was black. Tammy also started saying she saw someone in that front living room too. Finally, there was one day when it was just my boyfriend and I in the house. He was sleeping in the back room while I was watching TV in the second living room. I kept hearing a popping noise, like something was opening and closing. After about 10 minutes of it, I went to check. The sound was coming from the laundry room, and I found that the dryer door kept popping open. This was odd because I was already drying clothes. I shut the door and restarted the dryer, but when I went back to the bedroom, I heard the popping again. I went back to the laundry room, and the door was open again. I asked whoever was there to stop playing around and shut the door. I didn't have to restart the dryer this time. It started on its own. I quickly ran to the bedroom and laid down with my boyfriend. Not long after that, I noticed that my daughter started to go into the laundry room to play. I don't know if the ghost was following her or if it was just another part of the house's strange energy, but it was unsettling. I don't understand why the spirit seems to move around the house like that, or why my daughter is so drawn to it. I also don't know if it's the same ghost or multiple ones. But I do know one thing, it's creepy. Have you ever had a child who seemed to interact with a ghost? I moved to Victorville in late October 2005, knowing absolutely no one. The first day at school, a girl named Michelle approached me, and we instantly became best friends. That same day, I saw this guy, Jordan, and for some reason, I felt an immediate connection to him. Weeks went by before he even spoke to me, but a friend of his overheard me talking about him and passed the word along. Finally, Jordan approached me, and we started dating. It wasn't until New Year's Eve that I visited his house for the first time. I'll never forget the living room. It was by far the darkest, most depressing room I'd ever been in. No matter how bright the day was, that room stayed dark. Everyone usually hung out in the dining and kitchen area, which had a much lighter, happier vibe. The house was laid out in a way that always felt a little off. To the right of the front door were French doors leading into a study, which had been turned into a bedroom. To the left was the dining area, and from there you could either enter the kitchen or continue down a hallway. The living room, though, was at the end of the hallway. It was dark, and it felt like something was always lurking there. Beyond that was the boom room, which was kind of a den where people also slept. The first time I spent the night, Jordan and I slept in his room. I fell asleep first, but I woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone sitting up in the corner of the room staring at me. I thought it was one of Jordan's brothers who had come in to sleep, or maybe it was Jordan himself, but when I looked beside me, he wasn't there. I glanced down and saw Jordan sleeping on the floor beside the bed. I looked up again, but the figure was gone, and the door was locked. I didn't mention it to anyone, though, because they'd told me the house was haunted, just not the bedroom. Everyone said it was the hallway. Over time, the weird things started happening more often. Whenever the bedroom door was locked, it would rattle as if someone were trying to break in. Jordan always brushed it off, saying it was the wind, but none of the windows were open, and I was pretty sure wind couldn't shake a door that hard. I got used to the rattling, the cold chills in the hallways, and the doors slamming shut on their own. I just accepted that the house was haunted. Thankfully, I didn't have to live there permanently. One night, Jordan had a terrifying experience. He woke up and went into the hallway to get a glass of water. When he reached the door, he saw his niece, who was only about 18 months old, standing there. It was the middle of the night, and he thought maybe she was lost or walking toward her parents' room. He walked over to pick her up, but she vanished in front of him. Freaked out, he ran back to the room. I woke up when he came in, and we went together to check on his niece. Her parents' door was locked, and we couldn't get in. The next morning, Jordan's mom, Tammy, told us she had a similar experience. She often woke up in the middle of the night to check on things around the house. One night, as she walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, she heard a baby crying. When she turned the corner, she saw the same niece standing in the hallway. Tammy tried to comfort her, but when she got closer, the child smiled and disappeared. Again, the parents' door was locked, meaning the girl couldn't have been out there. But what really freaked everyone out happened one night when Tammy was cooking. From the stove, if you look to your right, you'd be looking straight down the dark hallway. Tammy was alone in the kitchen when everyone else came into the hallway from different rooms. As we all walked in, we saw Jordan's niece, Jamia, slammed against the wall by something unseen. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes following something moving toward the kitchen. We all froze, too scared to speak. After that, Jamia refused to play in the hallway, and we never talked about it again. I moved into the house not long after that, when my dad got arrested and I had nowhere else to go. I'd just come back from the bathroom one evening, walking down the hallway, when I glanced into the mirror at the end. I was thinking about how bad I looked when I suddenly saw a tall, dark figure walking behind me in the reflection. It didn't follow me. It walked from Tammy's room toward Jordan's room. There was no one else in the house, and I knew it wasn't anyone I recognized. I ran to the boom boom room and told Jordan, but there was no one there. A few weeks later, Taya and I were sitting in the kitchen, eating dinner when Jamia, now a bit older, said something that chilled us both to the bone. She pointed toward the hallway and said, "That's girls here." We looked, but there was nothing there. Then, a moment later, she added, "And that man's here too. He killed her. He killed the girl." She started smirking, giggling, and stabbing her fork into her plate, as though mimicking something she had seen. We moved her chair away from the hallway, but the strange talk didn't stop. She continued pointing to the hallway, saying the man was going to get the girl. I don't know how she could have known any of this. She was only 2 after all. Taya and I were terrified, convinced that Jamia was seeing something we couldn't. From that point on, she continued talking about the little girl and the man, and soon we all started seeing him too. Things got worse. Jordan and I started fighting more. Tammy and her boyfriend's relationship became strained, and one day, when I was pregnant, I just lost it. I had a huge argument with Jordan's brother Justin. He knocked over my water while picking up papers, and I threw a pair of sharp scissors at him. They missed by inches. As I stormed out, I felt like someone shoved me from behind, and I fell backward, only to be caught by Tammy's boyfriend, Deshe. I eventually left the house and went to stay with my grandma, but the hauntings didn't stop. Jordan continued to call and tell me stories about the strange things happening. Eventually, after more and more incidents, like Jamia being pushed around and the front door opening and closing on its own, Tammy and her family decided they had to move. The last straw came when Tammy was cleaning up after entertaining guests. She picked up Jamia and started walking toward the kitchen when she felt a force push her side. She began to fall in slow motion toward the glass coffee table, knowing she couldn't stop herself. Just as they were about to hit the table, it moved, fast, like it was shoved, and smashed against the wall. That was it. They packed up that night and left for good. I've never gone back, and I think it's a good idea to look up the history of that house, because whatever was haunting it was real. We never figured out what it was, but I know that everyone who lived there felt it, and every house they've moved into since then. Haunted too. This all started 2 years ago when I was a freshman in high school. My mom had always worked stressful jobs, but right before Thanksgiving, she got laid off from her government position due to downsizing. She was already dealing with false accusations from her employees, and this job loss hit her hard. After a few months, she found a new job working as a bank teller, even though the manager position she'd hoped for wasn't available. But before I dive into the strange things that happened, I need to paint a picture of the bank itself. It was located in a suburban area known for its beautiful landscaping. However, as you drove past the bank, you couldn't help but notice how neglected everything around it looked. The plants and trees seemed to be dying, no matter how many times gardeners replaced them. The inside of the bank was a throwback to the 70s. Ugly, smelly carpet, wood paneling on the walls, and outdated furniture. The people who worked there, including my mom's boss, were even worse. They were negative, backstabbing, and had a toxic atmosphere. One employee was even caught stealing money from the vault. Meanwhile, I was adjusting to my new school. I made a few friends, including a senior girl whose mom worked as a reflexologist and psychic. Over time, this woman started telling me about spirits, guardian angels, and past lives. At first, I was skeptical, just politely listening without really believing it. But then, Mom started coming home with stories from work that seemed off. At first, it was the usual office drama, but things quickly escalated. One day, a customer came into the bank to make a deposit. As she walked up to the counter, she suddenly froze and began to shiver. Mom asked her what was wrong, and the woman said she felt cold, even though the thermostat read 75 degrees. She left without making her transaction. Then came the stories from the bathroom. One day, Mom couldn't use the first stall because the toilet paper roll was missing. so she went into the second stall. As she sat down, the door slammed shut behind her and locked. As she struggled to get it open, she heard the toilet paper roll in the other stall spinning on its own. She crawled under the stall to escape. The creepiest story was when she had to take papers down to the basement. She'd never liked the basement. It felt wrong. The ceiling leaked constantly, and there was a dead potted plant in the corner, its leaves long gone, leaving just a sad, brown stem sticking up from the soil. When she sat at the nearby card table to rest, she suddenly felt someone pulling the chair out from underneath her. She screamed and ran back upstairs. These strange occurrences didn't stop there. More customers felt chills and left quickly. Mom even reported hearing faint laughter from the basement. Insects would fly in through the door, land somewhere, and immediately die. But what was really strange was that the other employees didn't seem to notice anything at all. Mom tried to clean up the place, and one day she got rid of the dead plant in the basement. That's when things seemed to take a turn for the worse. She and other employees started feeling sick, and she began having vivid dreams about a barn burning to the ground. One afternoon, the woman who gave me rides asked to meet my family, so we went to the bank to say hello. While we were waiting in line, I watched as the bank manager walked in. She was complaining loudly as usual when, out of nowhere, she fell to the floor. It wasn't a trip or a stumble. It looked like something had grabbed her leg and pulled her down. The woman I was with saw it too. Afterward, she invited us over for dinner. At dinner, Mom shared everything she'd been experiencing. The woman listened carefully and suggested that there was a vortex in the bank, possibly caused by someone dying in a barn fire nearby. She said the spirits were feeding off the negative energy created by the employees and that removing the dead plant had angered them. She recommended that Mom wear an amethyst necklace or keep a small amethyst bead in her pocket for protection. Mom tried it, and it seemed to help, but the weirdness didn't stop. Customers still experienced strange occurrences. Mom noticed that the spirits' behavior seemed childlike, spinning toilet paper rolls, pulling chairs out from under people, even causing a few harmless pranks. So in a moment of lightheartedness, I joked, maybe they're ghost children upset because they didn't get candy when they wanted it. To my surprise, Mom agreed, saying it wouldn't hurt to try offering candy as a peace offering. So she placed bowls of jelly beans, chocolate kisses, peppermint sticks, and licorice on the desks. Almost immediately, the strange reports stopped coming in from customers. But there was more. Within weeks, the other employees were suddenly fired. It was like the bank was clearing out the negative energy, one person at a time. What happened next completely shattered my skepticism. One morning, I was home alone, brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I felt a gust of wind around my ankles. The wind was so strong that it made my hair stand on end. I looked over at the window above the toilet, closed. The bathroom door, also closed. I shrugged it off, trying to rationalize it, but the weirdness didn't stop. Later that day, objects around the house began to fall off shelves and walls. While I was napping on the couch, a large framed picture fell off the wall and landed on top of me. Books tumbled off my shelves, crashing onto my desk. And then I heard it, a faint, eerie laugh. Our cats started acting weird too, skittering around the house as if they were chasing something invisible. When Mom came home, I told her everything that had happened. She freaked out, saying that the spirits had followed her home. Instead of buying more candy, she went to a toy store and bought a small doll wearing a frilly blue dress and tiny black shoes. She placed it next to a lamp in the living room. That night, while I was lying in bed, I saw it, a bright blue light, about the size of a tennis ball, floating in the darkness. It hovered for a moment before zipping off and disappearing. At that point, my skepticism had completely evaporated. Something from the bank, some negative force, had followed us home. We moved into our townhouse in El Monte, California, about 4 years ago. The place was fairly new, only about 20 years old, but El Monte itself is one of the older communities in Southern California. So there's an old, settled feeling to the area. Late at night, while I was lying in bed, I'd sometimes hear footsteps running up and down the stairs. It was an odd thing to hear when we lived in a townhouse, but I didn't think much of it at first. Our neighbor had 2 young kids, and I assumed it was their son running up and down the stairs on the other side of the shared wall. The floor plans of our townhouses were mirror images of each other, so their staircase aligned with ours, and I figured it was just the sound carrying through. But sometimes, the footsteps sounded like they were running up our stairs, and that made me wonder. Like most homes, ours had its share of oddities. Items would disappear, usually when they were sitting out in plain sight, on the kitchen table or the counter, for example. We'd search everywhere for them, and when we couldn't find them, we'd give up. But a couple of days later, the missing items would turn up, sometimes in the exact spot we'd already searched, sometimes under a newspaper or magazine, places we were certain we'd looked already. A couple of weeks ago, my wife woke me up around 2 a.m. She'd just come to bed and asked me what I'd done with the book she'd been reading earlier that afternoon. I told her I hadn't seen it since I'd come to bed, but she insisted it had been on the table next to her earlier. So reluctantly, I got up and started searching for it. The book was nowhere to be found. She eventually gave up and climbed back into bed, clearly frustrated. For the next few days, we both kept an eye out for it. I even got down on the floor, checking under the bed and the bedside tables. I did this a few times, figuring maybe I'd missed it or overlooked it in some way. You know how it is. When you lose something, you just keep thinking, maybe it's here this time, even though you've already looked there a dozen times. Then, one night, my wife came to me excited. "I found the book," she said, holding it up with a triumphant smile. It was tucked under her bedside table. Now, the gap under the bedside tables is pretty high, so anything underneath should have been easily visible. I've been down on the floor several times over the past week, searching in that very spot. The book was standing up on one end, like it had been placed there deliberately, not lying flat like a book typically would if it fell or got shoved under there. How had neither of us seen it before? It had been there for days, and both of us had been actively looking for it. How could we have missed something so obvious? That night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a tap on my shoulder. I rolled over, bleary-eyed, and asked my wife what was wrong. She was still reading her book, her head buried in it. "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. "Why did you tap me on the shoulder?" I asked, still half asleep. "I didn't touch you," she replied. I was still groggy and irritated, so I just rolled over and fell back asleep within seconds, brushing it off as a half-formed dream or something from the night. Maybe I'd imagined it. But the whole thing, the book, the tapping, the missing items that always turned up days later, just didn't sit right. I can't explain how that book ended up standing on end under the bedside table when we both searched for it, not once, but multiple times. It wasn't the first item in our house to disappear and reappear, and I'm sure it won't be the last. But it made me wonder, did we just miss it, or was something, or someone, borrowing our things? Was there an explanation, or were we dealing with something else entirely? It all started when I was 14. I was taking a shower, minding my own business, when suddenly a cold breeze hit me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then it happened again, and this time, a feeling stirred deep in the pit of my stomach. It was as if something was wrong, something unseen, but undeniably there. I rushed through drying off and getting dressed, my heart pounding. As I finished getting dressed, I heard it. A low, nasty growl coming from the right side of my mom's bed. It wasn't the growl of any animal I knew. It was dark and menacing. I bolted out of there and didn't look back. That night, things only got worse. My bed started shaking. At first, I thought maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was shaking the bed without realizing it. But then it happened again. My brother was sleeping with me at that point, so I woke him up. He was wide-eyed and said, "I felt it too." The bed was definitely shaking. It wasn't just me. From that night on, my brother, sister, and I all ended up sleeping in my mom's room, with the door locked. The noises didn't stop. I could hear things moving around in the front room. Shadows seemed to dart past the door to the hallway. Whispers floated through the air like faint, unintelligible words, but no one was there. One day, when I was home alone, I brought my dog inside. I was too scared to go to the back bathroom on my own, so I left my dog outside the door. But just as I was about to head back to my room, a loud crash echoed from within. My dog ran off, scared to return. I couldn't even convince her to go back in there. Eventually, we moved out of that house, and I thought things might calm down. But soon enough, our new house brought its own horrors. We moved into a place a family friend had once lived in. For a while, I felt safe, maybe too safe. But then, the nightmares started. Vivid, terrifying dreams where I couldn't move or speak, and some dark presence, was attacking me. Every night, I woke up drenched in sweat, unable to escape the terror. One night, I had a friend stay over. I never told him about the strange things I'd experienced, trying to ignore them myself. But then he saw it. While we were hanging out in my room, he asked me if my house was haunted. I was caught off guard, asking him, why? He told me he'd seen a figure in the hallway, a man, black in shape, standing there and looking into the room. I was terrified. How could he know? He wasn't supposed to know. That was the moment I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. My friend's friend, who had also been to my house, mentioned that 2 dogs lived there before, among other things. I had no idea what he meant, but I started to piece things together. Then I saw the dog. Twice. Both times, I thought it was my dog at first, but when I looked closer, it wasn't. The first time, I saw only the white legs and paws, just a quick glimpse. The second time, I was getting something from the fridge when I saw the face, a white dog's face, right beside me. It wasn't threatening, but it was unnerving. Then there was the knocking, the scratching on the walls, coming from outside, late at night. I'd hear this loud, vortex-like noise coming from the backyard. My dog would bark, frantic and scared. But what really bothered me was how my family never woke up to it. I began staying awake all night, just waiting for dawn, too terrified to fall asleep. It wasn't until later that I learned something unsettling about the land. My friend's friend knew the property had once been a landfill. The land itself had a history of darkness. I remembered a neighbor boy telling me something similar years before, and it all clicked into place. We eventually moved again, this time to an apartment near a cemetery. I figured I'd gotten away from whatever followed me, until it started again. My daughter, who was just a baby, would sometimes stare at nothing, laughing or quietly watching something in the corner of the room. It terrified me. I didn't want her to experience the same things I did. I didn't want her to be aware of the spirits that lingered unseen but present. One night, I visited Rockville Cemetery in Fairfield, Hay, with an ex-boyfriend. It was late, and I was just bored, but the moment my foot touched the soil, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. It felt like I was being watched, followed by something unseen. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. But that feeling, it was unbearable. I made him take me back to his house, and I never went back to that place again. Too many people from the area had shared their own eerie stories about it being haunted, and I could feel it in the air. These experiences left me with deep, lasting effects. I became an insomniac, haunted by the fear of spirits and the worry that something would break into my home. I couldn't sleep unless I had an animal with me. I needed to feel protected, like if something were to come, the animals could sense it before I could. I always sleep with my back against the wall, terrified that something might creep up behind me. If anyone knows of hauntings in Red Bluff, K, please let me know. I need answers, or maybe just some reassurance that I'm not the only one who's experienced these things. Since I was about 9 or 10 years old, I've been able to feel ghosts. I've heard them, felt them touch me, and sensed their presence, but I never actually saw one until I was 18. We had just moved out of the house I'd lived in from kindergarten through my early teens. It was a house I was sure had a ghost, but it was a friendly one that only bothered me a few times. We moved into a 2-story townhouse, and I absolutely adored it. My sister and I had the upstairs rooms, which each had a large sliding glass door opening to a balcony. At first, everything seemed perfect, but I started noticing strange things almost immediately. My room would get unbearably cold at night, even though the rest of the house felt warm. I complained to my mom about it, and she said it was because of the sliding glass door. She bought thick curtains to block out the chill, which helped a little, but the room was still far colder than the rest of the house. I'd usually come home around 10:30 or 11 at night and talk to my boyfriend on the phone before heading upstairs to bed. Every time I walked into my room, I'd get this eerie feeling, like someone was watching me. At first, I ignored it, but it didn't go away. One night, I was woken by the sound of footsteps running back and forth in the hallway. I figured it was my parents or my brother, since all our rooms were upstairs. The next morning, I asked if anyone had been up, walking around during the night, but they all said no. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. That wasn't the only odd thing. One night, I woke up around 1 or 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps down the stairs, followed by the door to the backyard slamming open and shut. I was so scared, I turned over in bed and forced myself back to sleep, trying to ignore it. I told my boyfriend about how strange my room felt, like someone was always there. He laughed it off and said I was crazy, until one night, when he came over to my house to watch a movie. We went into my room, and as he was putting the movie in, he suddenly dropped the disc. He looked over at me, pale, and said, "Now I don't want to scare you, but I just saw a lady standing on your balcony. She just vanished." I didn't see her, but my boyfriend had. He described her as having long blonde or white hair and wearing a blue dress. He was shaken, but it wasn't just him. He finally started believing me when it came to the strange things happening in my room. A few nights later, my boyfriend was babysitting my 1-year-old brother while my parents were out. He put my brother down for a nap in the crib upstairs and went downstairs to relax. After a while, he started hearing footsteps from upstairs and some noises. He went up to check on my brother, and when he walked into the hallway, he noticed the bathroom light was on. He turned it off, thinking nothing of it, but then he noticed something strange. When he walked into my parents' room, my brother was still asleep in his crib. But when he went back down the stairs, he heard more footsteps and decided to go back upstairs to check again. This time, the bathroom light was on again. He turned it off, but when he walked into the room, he was startled. My brother was sitting up in his crib, staring at the wall. He wasn't crying, which was unusual. He usually woke up crying when he stirred. He didn't even acknowledge my boyfriend as he walked into the room. Things didn't stop there. A week or so later, we were all in the living room. Me, my boyfriend, my stepdad, and my little brother. We were sitting on the couch, and I heard a noise. When I turned, I saw a woman standing there in the hallway. My heart raced as I called out, "Mom?" But when I got up to look, no one was there. The woman had vanished. I'd seen her before in my mind's eye, the woman my boyfriend had described on the balcony. She had blonde hair and a blue dress, but I thought it was my mom at first because of her blonde hair. I searched the house but found no sign of my mom. It was the same woman. Another time, my boyfriend spent the night downstairs. In the middle of the night, he woke up to find the woman standing at the end of the couch, just staring at him. She stayed there for a few minutes, then walked away. He saw her feet as she climbed the stairs and heard footsteps in the hallway above him, heading straight for my room. This woman, the only ghost I'd ever seen, was strange. She never seemed angry or malicious, but there was something unsettling about her. It was like she wanted something, but I couldn't figure out what. I never felt threatened by her, but she definitely creeped me out. It was almost like she was trying to get my attention, and the more I tried to ignore her, the more persistent she became. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Unless, of course, they have something to tell us. This is not my own experience, but a story my late mother shared with me when I was younger. My mother passed away when I was in the 6th grade, but her memories and stories live on, especially one unforgettable incident from her teenage years. My mother grew up in a small village in Kerala, India. Her house was on the bank of a serene river, a tributary to one of Kerala's larger rivers. The house, which no longer exists, was torn down in the 1990s to make way for a modern structure built by my uncle. Despite its age, my mother's old home had a charm that I adored, especially its proximity to the river. As a child, I envied my mom for growing up in such a picturesque location, surrounded by greenery and the gentle sounds of flowing water. But she often reminded me that even the most beautiful places can hold dark secrets. Near the house, there was a log bridge spanning the narrowest part of the river. Made from 2 coconut tree trunks with a rope for support, it was a central part of my mother's childhood. My mom and her siblings would jump off the bridge into the river, swim, and bathe by the steps carved into the riverbank. She had fond memories of these times, except for one evening that changed everything. One spring evening, when my mom was in her teens, she decided to go for a swim. Her brothers weren't home and her sisters were helping in the kitchen, so she went alone. Climbing onto the log bridge, she dove into the cool water and swam near the bridge. A short distance away, about 10 meters, was a deep section of the river which her parents had strictly forbidden them from entering. As she swam, she spotted a tortoise and, out of curiosity, decided to follow it. Unknowingly, she drifted closer to the deeper waters. The tortoise stubbornly ducked under the surface and disappeared, leaving her disappointed. She turned to swim back to the log bridge, but that's when it happened. She felt something grab her leg. It wasn't a brush of weeds or the pull of a current. She was sure it was a hand, an icy, cold hand, gripping her and dragging her downward. My mom later described the sensation vividly, saying it was nothing like the soft, clingy feel of underwater plants. It was firm, deliberate, and terrifying. She screamed as loudly as she could. Luckily, a neighbor nearby heard her cries, rushed to the river, and dove in. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the bank, where she fainted from shock. When she regained consciousness, her family surrounded her, desperate to know what had happened. Trembling, she recounted the icy hand that had grabbed her. Her grandparents, trying to calm her down, dismissed her fears as a misunderstanding, saying it was probably just weeds tangling around her leg. But my mom wasn't convinced. For the next week, she had recurring nightmares of the hand pulling her into the dark depths of the river. She avoided swimming entirely. Then, during a visit to a neighbor's house, the truth came to light. An elderly woman over 100 years old told my mom and her sisters about the history of that section of the river. Decades earlier, her aunt, jilted in love, had committed suicide by jumping into that very spot. The old woman claimed that her spirit haunted the river, lashing out at anyone who entered the deep waters. Her daughter confirmed the story, adding that the spirit was said to bring misfortune to anyone who swam there. When my mom asked her parents, they admitted they knew about the tragic story, but had kept it from the children to avoid frightening them. My mom and her sisters, now deeply unnerved, never swam in the river again. Instead, they bathed in a pool their family built near the house. To this day, I can't shake the image of my mom, terrified yet brave enough to share her story. It's a chilling reminder that some places, no matter how beautiful, hold secrets best left undisturbed. It was late November 2012, during my second year of MCA at SRM University in Chennai. I lived in a rented room near what students called the back gate of the campus. The area, known as Padari, was essentially a student hub. 80% of the population were university students, while the rest were shopkeepers and house owners. There was even a small railway station connecting the suburban train line to the campus. On normal days, Padari was bustling with life. Students in casual clothes, the chatter of friends, and busy tea stalls. But during semester breaks in December and June, the place transformed into a ghost town. Most students went home, leaving the streets eerily quiet, and the shops would remain shuttered. The incident I'm about to share happened around 2 to 3 a.m. on one such night in Padari. I usually went to the tea shop with friends, but that night I had to go alone. I debated skipping the trip, but ultimately gave in to my craving for a cigarette. I grabbed my wallet, phone, and watch and set out. It was about a 6-minute walk to the tea shop near the 2nd Street bus stand. However, as I passed an old, non-functioning shop along the way, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, something unsettling. I ignored it and kept walking. After having my coffee and cigarette at the tea shop, I began the walk back to my room. The streets were eerily empty, and for the first time I felt uneasy. Not because of ghosts or spirits. I wasn't one to believe in those, but because of the possibility of burglars or robbers. Still, I walked on. As I turned onto the quieter street leading to my room, everything felt normal at first. The psychedelic streetlights glowed faintly, and the cold wind brushed against me, but something about the atmosphere felt off. After walking for a minute, the streetlight nearest to me began flickering erratically, while all the other lights stayed steady. I paused, took a deep breath, and resumed walking. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of something striking the metal pole of the streetlight. The sharp noise startled me, and my heart raced. Without turning back, I instinctively moved closer to the old, non-functioning shop, the same one I usually avoided. I crouched near its shutter, trying to stay calm, and waited. After a few moments, I cautiously turned my head. What I saw froze me in place. Under the flickering streetlights stood a massive, dark, gaseous figure. It had no eyes, no clear shape, just a looming, formless shadow. The world around me felt surreal, as if I couldn't tell what was real anymore. My head spun, and I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the dark figure was pulling me into its grasp. I couldn't scream, couldn't think, and felt completely helpless. Even the street dogs were howling in terror. Finally, in a desperate attempt to snap myself out of it, I slammed the back of my head against the shop's metal shutter. Everything went black. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed the following morning. I was drenched in sweat and panting heavily. At first, I convinced myself it was all just a nightmare, but when I touched the back of my head while showering, I felt a sore spot, like I'd recently hit it hard. The memory of the night came rushing back. Still confused, I decided to go back to the street where it had all happened. It was daytime now, with people around, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But the question haunted me. If it wasn't a dream, how had I made it back to my room? As I turned to walk back, something caught my eye near the old shop. It was my watch, lying on the ground exactly where I had crouched the night before. This is an incident involving my bull aunt, my father's sister, that I witnessed personally. We share a close bond, like best friends, and we tell each other everything. What happened to her after her marriage is something that shook our entire family. My bull got married in May, in our native place, Sultanpur, Uttar Pradesh. Our family resides in Mumbai, but we traveled to Sultanpur for the wedding. After her marriage, when she returned to our house, her health began to deteriorate. She complained of severe stomach pain, splitting headaches, as if someone was hitting her head, and overall weakness. My grandma, caught up in the preparations for another upcoming family wedding, brushed it off, advising her to take medicines and rest. However, the medication didn't help, and her condition worsened. She began skipping meals, becoming more fragile by the day. After the second wedding, she decided to visit her Mausi, mother's sister, in Amithi to spend some time recovering. Meanwhile, I stayed at my granny's house, as we still had a few days before returning to Mumbai. One day, I received a call that my bull had been admitted to the hospital due to a high fever. I informed my father, who rushed to Amithi to be with her. She recovered after treatment and returned home, but what she revealed to me afterward left me utterly shocked. Her fever had been far from normal. Although the thermometer showed 105 Gruyers, she wasn't as seriously affected as one would expect with such a high temperature. It should have impacted her brain. Yet, it didn't. When we sat down to talk, she told me about the strange experiences she'd been having for months, both before and after her marriage. For 6 to 7 months prior, she'd been plagued by terrifying dreams. In one recurring dream, someone would break her chudas, bangles, a sacred symbol of marriage in Indian culture. She dreamed this 4 or 5 times. In another dream, while heading to a temple, she was attacked by a horrifying woman who snarled, "How dare you perform puja, holy rituals?" She was saved by a woman in saffron robes, who she believed was a goddess. Another dream was even more grotesque. She saw a man sever his own head, his body drowning in a river. while he stared at her with his detached head. It wasn't just dreams. At night, she felt her bed moving on its own and would wake up, chanting the names of gods. These experiences deeply disturbed her, yet she kept them to herself for the most part. Meanwhile, my dad, worried about her deteriorating health, consulted a friend who is a tantric, a practitioner of occult rituals. Without any prior knowledge of her dreams, the tantric described them in exact detail. He explained that the horrifying woman in her dreams was a chudale, a female ghost, trying to possess her body. The woman in saffron was a Devi goddess who is protecting her. He also revealed that this ghost had been following her for 8 years, late picked up from a discarded ritual object on the roadside, such as a lemon. The tantric pointed out that Bua's headaches were a result of the chudale attempting to gain control over her. Strangely enough, I recalled how she often told me, "It feels like someone is hitting my head." But at the time, none of us took her seriously. The tantric further explained why the ghost's presence had intensified after her marriage. In our village, there's a belief that if someone possessed by a ghost gets married, the ghost is also considered married. This bond strengthens its grip on the victim, worsening their condition. Thankfully, with the tantric's help, the ghost was exorcised from her body. The rituals were successful, and my Bua has since been living a healthy, happy married life. However, this experience profoundly changed her and our entire family's perception of the paranormal. This is an incident I'll never forget. It happened during a seance my friends and I conducted, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. Let me start from the beginning. Last year, my friend Vidya and I started a small society at our college dedicated to investigating paranormal phenomena. Our first meeting led us to plan a seance at an abandoned bungalow I had written about before. The place was infamous for being haunted with stories of eerie laughter and glowing oil lamps. Locals said the man who built the bungalow never left it, even after his death. We met at my house around 7 p.m. to prepare, gathering an Ouija board, flashlights, and candles. By 8 p.m., we set out for the bungalow. It was a chilly, windy night, perfect for our purpose. There were 5 of us, Vidya, me, 2 guys, and another girl. The streets were empty, making it easy for us to sneak in through the broken windows. The bungalow was more run down than before. Crumbling walls and an oppressive silence greeted us. We checked the place to ensure no vagrants or animals were inside. Apart from a startled cat, it was deserted. The house was stripped of furniture, and the peeling walls gave it an air of decay and foreboding. The ground floor had a kitchen, a storeroom, and a living room, while the first floor had 2 additional rooms. Vidya sensed something in the living room, so we decided to conduct the seance there. The room was enveloped in darkness, save for the dim glow of our candles. We were already nervous, but the setting heightened our fear. The guys joked about it being the perfect slasher movie setting, but after seeing our anxious faces, they quickly fell silent. We set up the Ouija board and began the seance, asking if anyone could hear us or wanted to talk. Almost immediately, the planchette moved towards yes. None of us pushed it. We barely touched it. Thrilled, we continued asking questions, trying to learn who the spirit was and if others were present. The spirit wouldn't reveal its identity. Instead, it grew angry, repeatedly spelling out Leade on the board. Terrified, we quickly said goodbye and ended the session. As we packed up, we all noticed the temperature drop sharply. It had been a chilly night, but now the air felt icy. Dismissing it as the wind, we tried to stay calm. Then, out of nowhere, Vidya started laughing hysterically. We froze. I had read about participants being possessed during seances, and Vidya had always been sensitive to spirits. Her laughter stopped abruptly, and she closed her eyes. For a moment, she looked serene, almost peaceful. Then she opened her eyes. Her pupils were dilated, her face expressionless, and her mouth curled into a sneer. She spoke in a voice that wasn't hers in Marathi. "Leave this place right now, or you will be harmed." It was the warning we needed. We grabbed our candles, the board, and everything else we brought. The guys carried Vidya, who had lost consciousness. We didn't stop until we were out of the bungalow's gates. The moment we left, Vidya woke up. She was back to her senses, but shaken. She told us she had seen an old man walking down the stairs during her trance. She described the possession as a violation of her mind, something she never wanted to experience again. We didn't return to the bungalow after that night. Vidya and I were convinced something malevolent resided there. When the guys suggested we go back in daylight, I firmly refused. I wanted nothing more to do with that place. Even now, I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed longer. The thought alone is enough to send shivers down my spine. That night was my first and last seance in that cursed bungalow. I've never been someone who believed in ghosts or the paranormal, probably because I've never experienced anything myself. But what happened to my mother changed my perspective completely. My mom works as a nurse at a hospital in their role. This incident took place during one of her shifts last year. She had an evening shift that day, followed by a morning shift the next day. During such back-to-back shifts, she usually stays at the hospital overnight in her room, along with a colleague, instead of traveling back home late at night and returning early in the morning. That evening, she wasn't feeling well. She developed a fever during her shift, and by the time it ended at 11 p.m., she was quite sick. After informing a doctor about her condition, she quickly prayed, she's very spiritual, and went to her room to sleep. Her roommate was on the night shift, so she was alone. Exhausted and unwell, she fell asleep almost immediately. Around 2 a.m., she was startled awake by the sound of her door creaking open. This was surprising because she always latches the door before sleeping, but she thought she might have forgotten due to her fever. She then noticed a man entering the room, dressed in a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. Assuming he was a doctor on his rounds checking on her after hearing she was sick. She didn't think much of it at first, but then the air in the room grew unusually cold, as if the AC had been switched on, something she knew wasn't possible. As the man approached her bed, she noticed something unsettling. His face kept changing. With every step he took, his face shifted, taking on the appearances of various people she knew, friends, colleagues, and even her family, including me. She was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. Trying to rationalize, she thought she might be hallucinating because of the fever. Blinking a few times, she tried to clear her vision. When she looked again, the man had taken on a new, unfamiliar but handsome face. He stood beside her bed, silent and expressionless. Still assuming he was a doctor, she calmed herself slightly when he reached out to check her temperature by placing his hand on her neck. But then she noticed something odd. His hands were icy cold. The chill was unbearable, and when she tried to push his hand away, his other hand reached out and started choking her. Terror gripped her as she looked up at his face, which once again began shifting through the faces of her loved ones. She desperately wanted to scream, but found herself unable to make a sound. That's when she remembered her rosary, which was in her bag next to the bed. Summoning all her strength, she reached for it. The moment her fingers wrapped around the rosary, the figure let out a piercing howl and vanished into thin air. Shaking, my mom grabbed the rosary and fled to her colleague's room. She burst in, breathless and trembling, and shared what had just happened. Her colleague was equally alarmed and mentioned that strange things had happened in the hospital before. Lights flickering on and off at night, unexplained noises from empty rooms, and other eerie incidents. For the rest of the night, my mom stayed in her colleague's room, too terrified to return to hers. The next morning, she applied for leave and came home. She tried to act normal, telling my dad she wasn't feeling well, but I could tell something was bothering her. When I asked, she was hesitant to share at first, not wanting to scare me, but after I insisted, she relented and told me everything. I was shocked. My mom is one of the most spiritual people I know, and for her to experience something so terrifying was hard to comprehend. Even now, my mom continues to work at that hospital, but she never leaves home without her rosary. That experience left a lasting impression on both of us. I can't imagine how terrifying it must have been for her, and I've decided I never want to set foot in that hospital. This incident happened during my second year of and left a lasting impression on all of us. It's a bit of a long story, so thank you for bearing with me. 4 of us shared a spacious room, and for practical purposes, We bought common laundry supplies like detergent and fabric softener. About halfway through the term, one of my roommates decided to do her laundry. She noticed that the fabric softener bottle was empty and asked if one of us had used it all. I assured her it was impossible since we had just cleaned the room the day before, and I distinctly remember the bottle being more than half full. Thinking I must have been mistaken, we shrugged it off and forgot about it. To give you some context, our room had 2 bunk beds along 2 walls, with a table next to one of the beds along the longer wall. The other side of the room had another table and our wardrobes. A clothesline was tied across the middle of the room, adding to the cozy, lived-in vibe. One evening, we were sitting on the floor, studying on the side of the room farthest from the beds, when something strange happened. A thick mathematics book fell open, face down from the table near the bed. None of us had moved, and there was no logical way we could have disturbed the table. What's more, the book had been in the middle of the table, far from the edge. There was no way it could have simply slipped and fallen. We were unnerved, but still rationalized it as a coincidence. Then the fabric softener incident happened again a week later, another bottle inexplicably emptied. Around the same time, we experienced something even stranger. While getting ready to go out, a peg fell from the clothesline. One of us picked it up and put it back, but as soon as she turned away, another peg fell. I picked that one up, and yet another peg dropped. By now, we were growing uneasy. Our schedules didn't always align, so one day, 2 of us were back in the room earlier than the others. We pulled our mattresses to the floor and lay on our stomachs, chatting. Suddenly, 3 drops of water fell right in front of our faces onto the tile floor. It was peak summer, and there was no chance of leakage. To be sure, we inspected the walls and ceiling, but they were bone dry. The mystery unnerved us enough that we left the room in a hurry. The softener kept vanishing, despite our locking the room whenever we went out, and only we had the keys. Then came the final incident, the one that pushed us over the edge. One night, we all pulled our mattresses to the floor since it was too hot to sleep on the bunks. As we prepared for bed, the hallway light illuminated a faint arc of light under the door. While settling in, we realized the door wasn't latched. It swung open slightly before swinging back. Annoyed, one of us got up to lock it. When she reached for the latch, she screamed. The latch was already bolted. She jumped back into bed, and we huddled together, too terrified to move or sleep. The next morning, we shared our experiences with some friends. One of them joked that maybe we were feeding the ghosts with fabric softener and suggested we stop using it. Laughing nervously, we decided to try it. At the same time, we began acknowledging what we thought might be a presence in the room. Maybe it was our imaginations, but the air in the room felt heavier. We even tried speaking to whatever spirit might be there, hoping it would bring some peace. Around this time, one of my roommates fell ill with a persistent fever. Her family, being superstitious, took her to a mosque when she returned home for recovery. They prayed, gave offerings, and gave her a talisman to wear. Strangely enough, she recovered quickly and returned to college. After that, the eerie incident stopped. None of us could fully explain what happened in that room, but the experiences left us shaken. Whether it was a playful spirit or just a series of strange coincidences, we learned to tread lightly and keep an open mind about things we don't understand. I moved into this house after my marriage in 2009. It's a spacious 4-bedroom flat in central Mumbai, built on a plot of land purchased by my husband's grandmother in the 1940s. Originally, a small bungalow stood there, but as her family grew, she decided to replace it with a building. The construction was fraught with delays and issues, taking 15 years instead of the planned 5. Grandma faced many challenges with the builders and contractors, which consumed her energy until her final days. The family endured significant hardship during this time, and soon after moving into the new house, my father-in-law passed away unexpectedly. This devastating loss was followed by Grandma's passing a few years later. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I was 14 years old when my father got posted to a small town near Pume. Overnight, we packed up and left our home to join him. We moved to a charming cottage named Gulab, which means rose. The cottage was owned by a warm and loving family who welcomed us with open arms. My mother, younger brother, and I settled into the first floor, while my father stayed at his workplace during the week and only visited on weekends. The owners had 3 children, Sunita, Anita, and Anish. Anita and I quickly became friends since we were the same age. Her father worked in a remote village, so he was rarely home, while her mother, a teacher, often traveled to visit him with their youngest son. Anita's grandmother lived with them and took care of the girls. The entrance to our floor was at the back of the cottage. After climbing several steps, you'd reach our bedroom first, followed by the living room. From day one, I was uneasy about those stairs in our bedroom. It was cold, gloomy, and faced the back of the cottage, unlike the sunny, cheerful rooms facing the front. At night, the bedroom would get so uncomfortably cold that my mother, brother, and I sometimes slept in the living room or balcony. My mother occasionally heard faint knocking sounds on the roof above the bedroom, but we dismissed it as part of adjusting to a new place. Sunita, Anita's older sister, was a bit of a mystery. She was in junior college and preparing for her 12th grade exams. Her basement room was always locked, and she didn't allow anyone inside, not even her grandmother. Once, Anita and I tried to sneak in, but Sunita scolded us. We chalked it up to her being a moody elder sibling. One summer evening, Anita's mother had to travel due to a family emergency and asked my mother to stay over and watch the kids. Excited for a sleepover, my brother, mother, and I joined them after dinner. Everyone decided to sleep in the living room except Sunita, who insisted on staying in her room. Later, she suddenly came out and demanded a big bowl of milk. Her odd request led to an argument with my mother, who refused without an explanation. That's when Sunita broke down and revealed a chilling story. When Sunita was about 4 or 5, her room used to be a nursery with a door leading to the back garden. At the time, the first floor was under construction, and the contractor's wife and baby boy lived in a temporary shed where our bedroom now stood. One afternoon, the baby tragically fell from the first floor and died outside Sunita's door. That night, the baby's mother cried inconsolably, and shortly after, she took her own life. The contractor left the job, but Sunita started hearing cries near her room every night. Her parents dismissed her fears, attributing them to the trauma of the incident. Eventually, Sunita began sleeping in her parents' room. However, one night she woke up to see a woman and a child standing at the foot of her bed, repeatedly asking for milk. Frozen with fear, she fainted and later became severely ill. Her grandmother, sensing something unusual, called a priest. The priest explained that the spirits of the woman and child were lingering due to their tragic deaths. He suggested a ritual and advised Sunita to keep a bowl of milk outside her room on full moon nights. Sunita's parents didn't believe in ghosts, but allowed her to keep the milk. To her shock, the bowl would be empty within minutes. While the crying and sightings lessened over time, Sunita continued hearing faint sounds occasionally. That night was a full moon, and Sunita wanted to follow the ritual. We reluctantly agreed and watched as she placed a bowl of milk in her room's far corner before locking it from the outside. She then joined us in the living room, but none of us could sleep, waiting anxiously for morning. At dawn, we rushed to her room. To our disbelief, the bowl was empty, not a drop spilled, and the room was undisturbed. None of us had gone inside, and the room had been locked all night. Sunita begged us to keep quiet about the incident to avoid ridicule. We stayed in that cottage for a few years, but never encountered anything else unusual. Sunita moved out a year later for her studies, and no one ever dared to use the basement room again. This incident happened in 1990 to 91 when I was working as a research officer at a prestigious R&D center in Avadi, Madras, now Chennai, India. I lived in a newly built hostel on campus designed for officers. The three-story building had 8 furnished apartments on each floor, perfect for bachelors. My apartment was the last one on the 3rd floor. It was a cozy space, but during summers, the wooden furniture and bed would get uncomfortably hot. The layout of the apartment was simple. Entering from the front door, there was a long living room leading to a balcony at the end. To the left were the kitchen, bathroom, lavatory, and a spacious bedroom with a large closet and a window that let in plenty of light and air. I lived there as a bachelor for 2 years and stayed on after getting married, as it was convenient and well furnished. A few months into my marriage, my mother-in-law came to visit us during the summer. Power outages were common, and we often sat outside our front door for some fresh air, leaving the balcony door open to keep the apartment cool. Below our apartment, on the ground floor, lived an army officer, his wife, their young daughter, and a few visiting relatives. The officer was away on business when the incident occurred. One evening during a power outage, my wife, mother-in-law, and I were sitting in the corridor outside our apartment when we heard a scream from the ground floor. The officer's wife was shouting for help, claiming there was a thief in their house. She and her family were standing outside their front door, visibly frightened. I quickly ran downstairs with a couple of friends to assist. The officer's wife, still shaking with fear, explained that she had gone inside to fetch water when she saw a man in a white shirt and trousers standing near the bedroom door. She froze in fear as he glared at her with angry eyes and muttered something she couldn't understand. Then he turned and walked into the bedroom, disappearing into the closet. The family couldn't figure out how he had entered since they had been sitting outside, and the back door was blocked by a large refrigerator. Panicked, the lady ran outside and latched the front door to trap him inside. We decided to investigate. Armed with sticks, we entered the house and searched every corner, the living room, kitchen, bathroom, and lavatory. There was no sign of anyone. Finally, we checked the closet, opening each door one by one. The closet was empty. There was no sign of the intruder anywhere in the house. We tried to reassure the officer's wife, but the incident left her shaken. Though we didn't say it aloud, we suspected the intruder might not have been human. The lady never saw the man again, but she remained deeply unsettled. A few months later, another resident of the building, a bachelor named Sajj, had a terrifying experience in his apartment on the 3rd floor. Sajj was a confident and fearless man, known for his bodybuilding. One night around 2 a.m., he banged on his neighbor Bao's door, crying for help. When Bao opened the door, he found Sajj trembling, drenched in sweat, and unable to speak. Bao calmed him down and let him stay for the night. The next morning, Sajj explained what had happened. He said he was sleeping when a strange voice woke him up. Opening his eyes, he saw a dark figure standing next to his bed, staring at him. Before he could react, the figure sat on his chest and began choking him. Sajj felt completely paralyzed and couldn't breathe. He thought he was going to die, but suddenly the figure released its grip. Gathering all his strength, Sajj ran out of his apartment to Bao's door. This incident shook Sajj so much that he applied for a transfer and moved closer to his home state of Kerala. In 2016, for my 17th birthday, my family and I traveled from Jaipur to Udaipur, Rajasthan, a trip we often made to celebrate special occasions. My dad works for the Indian Railways, and we stayed at a government holiday home in Udaipur, a beautiful 2-story building surrounded by trees and a stretch of land at the back. We'd stayed there many times before without any issues, but this time was different. We were assigned rooms on the 1st floor for the first time. My parents stayed in room number 13, while my brother and I were next door in room number 14. After dinner, we went to our rooms to relax. My brother and I stayed up watching TV and using our phones while my parents went to bed early. That night, my dad woke up to the sound of Gangu's anklets worn by classical dancers just outside his room. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the sound continued, as if someone was walking slowly. Annoyed, he got up to check, but found no one in the corridor. It didn't make sense. If someone had been there, they would have had to cross the hallway to reach the staircase, and he would have seen them. He returned to bed, but the sound started again as soon as he closed his eyes. Frustrated, he went outside again to catch whoever was responsible, but once again, the corridor was empty. Confused, he came to our room and asked if we'd heard anything. We told him we hadn't. The TV volume was low and we were wide awake, so we would have noticed any noise. My dad asked us to join him in their room but didn't tell us what he'd heard. Once in their room, my dad seemed tense, pacing and asking if we could hear anything. My mom woke up and asked what was going on. Around 1:30 a.m., as my parents tried to sleep again, the sound returned, this time inside their room. It moved, shifting from next to the bed to the corridor outside. Each time they opened their eyes, the sound would stop. The situation worsened when they heard banging on the window grills, as if someone was hitting them with a stick. This scared my dad because their room was on the first floor and it was impossible for anyone to reach the window. There were no trees near the window that could explain the sound either. It felt deliberate, as though someone was trying to wake them up. Terrified, my parents chanted prayers and eventually managed to fall asleep, despite the strange noises. The next morning, over tea, my parents finally told us what had happened. They asked again if we'd heard anything, and we repeated that we hadn't. We were awake until 3 or 4 a.m., with the TV off after 2 a.m., so we could have easily heard something. Their faces turned pale as they recounted the entire incident. At first, we were skeptical, but the seriousness in their tone convinced us something truly strange had happened. Later, my dad mentioned the experience to a colleague, Mr. N, who was from Udaipur. Mr. N was shocked and asked why we'd been given rooms on the first floor. He explained that the floor was rumored to be haunted. Years ago, a woman's body had been found in the land behind the building, and guests on the first floor often reported strange experiences. This left us stunned. We visited the holiday home again in 2017, but this time we stayed on the floor. Nothing unusual happened during that visit, and things felt normal, as they always had before. I still wonder why the strange events happened only on the first floor. Could it have something to do with the design or the energy of the place? Was room number 13 significant? And why didn't we in the next room experience anything? One possible explanation is that my parents might be more sensitive to such phenomena due to their aura. This wasn't their first brush with the unexplained. My elder sister has been haunted by an unknown entity for the past 16 years. We still don't know what it is, whether it's a ghost, a spirit, or the result of black magic. She doesn't see this entity when she's awake, but it makes its presence felt through strange occurrences like banging doors or turning off fans while she's sleeping. We often dismiss these things as natural, blaming the wind or her forgetting to switch off appliances. My sister is a dentist living alone in Punjab. According to her, the hauntings began in 2002 when she was doing her BDS in Modinagar. One night, after attending a college party, she and her friends were returning to the hostel when she saw a hand emerge in the middle of the road. From that moment, her unsettling journey began. Once she saw her friend running down the corridor toward the staircase. But when my sister followed her, there was no one there. Another time, she was studying in a friend's room when her friend suddenly froze, her head lowered. My sister asked her what was wrong. Her friend then lifted her head, gave a devilish smile, and started dragging my sister out of the room. At that moment, a senior entered and asked what was happening. To my sister's shock, her friend claimed it was my sister who was dragging her, when in reality, it was the opposite. This incident left my sister shaken. The worst occurred just a few months ago. One night, my sister called my father in a panic, but his phone was switched off. She then called my mother, crying, "Mom, someone is in the bathroom banging the door badly." My mother woke my father, who began reciting the Mahamrityunjaya mantra, mentally creating a protective circle around my sister. Meanwhile, my mother turned on the Hanuman Chalisa on her phone to calm her. The noises eventually stopped, and my sister managed to fall asleep. Over the years, my parents have sought help from many spiritual people who suggested remedies that worked temporarily, but the entity would always return. At one point, my sister dreamed that the entity told her no puja, prayer ritual, would work, and that it would remain with her like a mobile phone. When I visited her in June, 2017, I experienced something myself. That night, I played the Dattatreya Vajrakavaksham and slept next to her. At exactly 3:29 a.m., her room's door banged loudly. My sister gripped my hand tightly. Taking Datta's name for courage, I got up to check. It was raining heavily and the wind was strong. I bolted the door, reassured her, and went back to bed. Last year, I visited the Sri Swamisamarth Guru Pitha in Nasik to discuss my sister's problems. The guidance given to her was to perform certain pujas herself. On Guru Purnima, a Swamisamarth idol was miraculously established in her home. A big moment, because whatever this entity is, it had always prevented her from performing pujas before. Since then, my sister has been regularly praying, and the hauntings have significantly reduced. While the entity hasn't completely disappeared and still creates hurdles in her life, we're hopeful it will be gone soon. My sister's strength is remarkable. Living alone with these hauntings for years is no small feat, and her resilience has kept her moving forward. I truly believe her faith and perseverance will finally end this ordeal. I have loved horror stories since childhood, but I always believed that most experiences were exaggerated rather than real. People who experience such things believe them, and those who don't wait for their turn. I was in the latter group until something happened to me that completely changed my perspective. It was a cold winter night, and my brother had to catch a late-night train at 11 p.m. to a far-off town. I decided to drop him at the station, which was about 15 kilometers from home. The route to the station was lonely and deserted at night. It was a path people avoided after dark because of the mysterious incidents reported there. Even during the daytime, that road had a silent, eerie vibe, with thick bushes and towering trees adding to the spooky atmosphere. That night, my brother and I left home a bit early on my scooty to get to the station. My cousin, who was visiting, insisted on coming along so he could accompany me on the way back. On the way to the station, he suggested taking the lonely road for the thrill of it. I immediately refused, as it was long, unsafe, and unnecessary when the main road was shorter and safer. We reached the station, and my brother's train was delayed by about 20 minutes. Once the train arrived, we said our goodbyes and returned to the parking lot. There, we saw an old woman with a strange, unsettling face staring at us. She asked for food, but we politely told her we didn't have any and went to my scooty. My cousin again urged me to take the lonely road on our way back. Despite my hesitation, he kept saying everything would be fine. Reluctantly, I agreed. That decision remains one of my biggest regrets. Even as we started the journey, my mind was racing with uneasy thoughts. I considered turning back to take the safer route, but my cousin reassured me it would be fine. Initially, the road seemed normal, and I began to relax. My cousin drove while talking about college to distract me, but I noticed the wind growing colder and the rustling leaves adding to the tension. Suddenly, I saw an old woman walking ahead. My cousin stopped the scooty. I asked him why he had stopped, and as the woman approached, we were horrified. It was the same old lady we had seen at the station. Fear gripped me, and I urged him to move, but instead he asked the woman what she was doing on this lonely road at such a late hour. She eerily asked us the same question. She claimed she was heading home and warned us that it wasn't safe to travel at night. Her voice sent chills down my spine, and as she spoke, we noticed blood-stained scratches on her neck. The sight made us both feel uneasy, and I shouted at my cousin to drive immediately. He accelerated quickly. After moving just a few meters, I looked back. My heart sank. She was gone. It was impossible for her to have disappeared so quickly. I told my cousin, and he sped off, almost knocking me off the scooty when we hit a hump. All we wanted was to get away from that place as fast as possible. A few kilometers ahead, we saw her again. This time, we didn't slow down or look in her direction. We drove straight past her, our fear growing with every second. We only stopped when we reached a shop near the highway. Breathless and in shock, we ordered tea and shared our experience with the shopkeeper. His response left us even more shaken. He told us that a year ago, an old woman had been found dead on that road. The police discovered fingernail marks on her neck, but the case remained a mystery. We returned home safely, but never told our parents, knowing they would scold us for taking that route. Even now, thinking about that night sends shivers down my spine. It remains the most terrifying experience of my life, and I've never taken that road again. This incident happened when I was visiting my aunt's house in my village. Her house is located on their farmland, where they own a cotton mill. The farm is on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by vast barren lands, making the area quite deserted. About 10 years before this incident, an old servant who had worked for years in my aunt's house and mill had hanged himself in the mill. He was deeply attached to our family and had been a loyal worker for a long time. No one ever discovered the reason for his death, but after he passed away, strange noises and unusual happenings started occurring in the mill. At times, my uncle had to wake up in the middle of the night to check the mill, only to find machines running, even though they had been switched off before he returned home. My uncle didn't believe in anything paranormal, but my aunt did. She often said something felt off in the mill, and she was too scared to go there alone. During my summer vacation, I stayed at my aunt's house. The house is surrounded by trees, so it always stayed cool even during the peak of summer. One night, the power went out, and I woke up feeling hot. I opened the window to let in the cool breeze from the trees and soon fell back asleep. Sometime later, I woke up to a loud, continuous noise, like the sound of a machine running. I peeped out of the window and realized the noise was coming from the mill. What made it strange was that there was still no power. My uncle must have heard it too, because he came out of his room with a torch, opened the main door, and walked toward the mill. Out of curiosity, I followed him. It was pitch dark outside as we reached the mill. My uncle unlocked the office door and went in to search for the keys to the machinery room. When he couldn't find them, he asked me to stay there while he went back home to get the spare keys. Left alone in the office, I felt uneasy. The machinery room was locked, but the loud sound of the machine continued. I was sweating both from the heat and fear. I picked up the torch and walked toward the machinery room. Even though the door was locked, the noise didn't stop. My uncle returned with the keys and unlocked the machinery room. What I saw next shocked me more than it did him, as he had experienced this before. The machine inside was running at full speed, making a deafening noise despite the lack of power. My uncle asked me to stay there while he went to the power room to check for any power supply issues. I kept staring at the machine in disbelief as it gradually slowed down and stopped on its own. The room fell silent. Suddenly, I heard footsteps and saw a light coming from the go-down area moving toward me. Assuming it was my uncle, I relaxed slightly, but as the figure came closer, I froze. It wasn't my uncle. It was an old man holding a lantern standing at the entrance of the machinery room. Trembling with fear, I screamed, and he vanished into thin air. Just then, the power came back and the light switched on. There was no one there. My uncle came running, alarmed by my scream, and asked what had happened. I pointed to where I had seen the old man and told him what I saw. He didn't believe me and insisted there was no one else in the mill besides us. I asked him why the machine had been running, and he admitted he didn't know. Despite it happening multiple times, he could never find an explanation. He switched off the main power, locked the machinery room, and started walking back to the office. As I followed him, I felt a heavy sensation as if someone was trying to pull me back. I turned around, but there was no one there. We locked the office and returned home, though my mind kept replaying the image of that old man. The next morning, I told my aunt about what had happened. She was visibly frightened and finally told me about the old servant who had worked with them for many years and had hanged himself in the storage area of the mill. She explained that the storage area had been locked ever since his death because of the strange and unexplained occurrences that started happening. I still believe the old man I saw that night was the same servant who had worked for their family. It was my first time staying away from my family in a hostel, and I was genuinely excited about it. I settled in well and made a few friends. On my floor, there was a girl named Remy, and over time, we became good friends. She once told me her mother had passed away less than a year ago. One evening, I was helping Remy get ready for a date with her boyfriend, whom she had been with for over 2 years. Remy always wore several old threads on her wrist, and while preparing her, I started removing them without her noticing. I thought they looked dirty and unhygienic. When she realized what I was doing, she panicked and told me they were holy threads. She said that every time she removed them, she fell sick. Hearing that, I felt bad and let her put them back on. The next day, everything seemed normal. Remy, I, and a few others spent the evening playing in the hostel. Later, we all went to our rooms to study. Remy looked completely fine when we parted, but later that night, her boyfriend called me, sounding worried. He said something was wrong with her. I rushed to her room and found her shivering in a corner with the lights off. Her body temperature was extremely high. Worried, I took her to my room so I could look after her. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time, but I later regretted this decision. Her condition worsened, and we had to take her to the hospital at midnight. The doctors did several tests, but found nothing wrong with her. She seemed fine the next day, but from that night onward, strange things started happening to me. Every night, I would wake up at exactly 3:20 a.m. I felt like someone was sitting on the chair at my study table, staring at me. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but the feeling grew stronger every night. One night, I woke up again at the same time, but this time, I felt someone lying behind me, breathing on my neck. Terrified, I tried to turn around, but my body wouldn't move. I was completely frozen. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my mouth. Panicking, I began silently praying, reciting God's name over and over. After some time, I regained control of my body. I reached for my phone, but it was switched off, which was strange because I never turn it off at night. When I tried to turn it on, it wouldn't work. Then I heard fast whispering near my ear. It was a strange female voice, so close that it felt like she was right next to me. I prayed harder, and the whispering finally stopped. I ran to my friend's room and stayed there for the rest of the night without telling her what had happened. The next night, I heard a loud thud outside my door at midnight, as if something heavy had fallen. From that day on, stray dogs near the hostel started barking uncontrollably at night. Whenever I went outside, they barked at me as if they could see something I couldn't. One night, I kept my door open while I slept, thinking it would help me escape if something strange happened. I was half asleep when I heard the sound of footsteps running past my door. I ignored it, assuming I was imagining things again. But then I heard the sound of a camera clicking and saw a flash of light. Annoyed, I got up and shut the door, thinking someone was playing a prank. When I went back to bed, I noticed my phone's screen was on and unlocked. That was impossible, as no one knew my password. I picked up my phone and found the gallery open. There were pictures of me sleeping on my bed. The last picture sent chills down my spine. It was a negative image of a slim, beautiful girl I didn't recognize. I couldn't understand how those photos got there, or who had taken them. Since that night, I have been too scared to sleep in the dark. I keep the lights on in my room every night. I don't know who or what that girl was, but the memory of those nights still haunts me. I have no explanation for what I experienced, but I'll never forget how terrified I was. Finally convinced my mother that something was wrong, though my father remained skeptical. In 1992, I had a chilling experience while alone in the house. I felt a cold, invisible hand rest on my shoulder. That icy sensation stayed with me for years. Around this time, my parents discovered I had covered the walls and doors of my rooms cupboard with drawings of the dead. It was also in that cupboard that my favorite book vanished while I was reading it with a flashlight. Despite searching everywhere, it was never found. Later that year, while my sister was away at camp, I kept hearing her voice calling me throughout the house, even though she wasn't there. It made no sense, but I couldn't explain it. By early 1993, the strange greeting we had heard from my father repeated itself. This time, even he began to question what was happening after our dog started barking at the ceiling one night, followed by an audible sigh no one could explain. My mother also began hearing a soft singing in the hallways late at night, though it always stopped when she checked. Things escalated when my sister described being chased by an icy presence that lifted her off the ground whenever she tried to stop. One night, while my mother was out picking me up from a friend's house, my sister and her friend were found sobbing in the street. They claimed they had heard footsteps in the hallway, seen doors opening on their own, and watched lights and radios flicker on and off. I once saw the apparition of a teenage boy in the hallway. Later, I saw him again, this time with a witness, which only added to the growing tension in the house. My sister eventually gathered a small group of friends for a séance of sorts. Whatever they did that day seemed to end the disturbances. Afterward, it was as though nothing had ever happened. Even the crows disappeared. 2 years later, when I was 9, a classmate who lived nearby shared a story about her house being haunted. Strangely, her experiences matched mine exactly, down to the details. That same week, the crows returned, first in small numbers, then in flocks of 20 or more. I live with my father and brother in Johannesburg, South Africa. And no, there are no lions or antelope running through the streets. It's a city, just like any other. In the U.S., I'm 19 now and a geography student at the University of Johannesburg. As a meticulous and scientifically inclined person, I approach most things with logic and reason. This story happened a couple of years ago in April, autumn in the Southern Hemisphere, when we took a vacation to the northeastern part of the country, in Vendeland. This area is lush, with small rainforests and swamps, located near the famous Kruger National Park. It's still a wild region, home to lions, crocodiles, antelope, and countless other animals. I was 17 at the time, nearing the end of school, and this trip was exactly what I needed. We stayed at the Punta Maria camp, the northernmost camp in Kruger, for a week. We saw amazing wildlife, nyalas, giraffes, hippos, leopards. But eventually, we grew bored and decided to visit Thohoyandou, the capital of Vendeland. The Venda people, though modernized, have held on to certain traditions. One of their most fascinating beliefs is in a white crocodile, which they revere as a god. This legend has been part of their culture for centuries, possibly millennia. They worship this creature for its power and invincibility, even claiming it once demanded young girls as sacrifices to prevent illness and disaster. Stories tell of girls walking into the lake with baskets of impala meat, only to disappear beneath the water, leaving nothing but red ripples under the full moon. Intrigued, I wanted to see this legendary creature for myself. With a guide named Elias, nicknamed Whitey because of his fluent English, we planned a nighttime trek into the forest to the sacred lake, a place where outsiders are forbidden during the day. That night remains vivid in my memory. The forest was dense, filled with cycads, thorn bushes, and lush greenery. By 10:30 p.m., we reached the lake and sat on the shore to rest. My brother had a powerful flashlight, but when he shone it over the water, there were no telltale red glints of crocodile eyes, which was strange given how common crocodiles are in this region. As the moon dipped lower, Whitey urged us to leave, warning that the darkness would soon make it impossible to see. My brother tossed a piece of meat into the lake, attracting mosquitoes. That's when we heard it. A loud, hissing bellow from the shore. Whitey, clearly spooked, climbed a nearby tree for safety. The three of us stayed on the ground watching. What emerged from the water wasn't a ghost or a crocodile. It was massive, grayish in color, and unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its head resembled a crocodile's, but wasn't as flat. The creature stood on 2 legs, had a long tail, and small forearms. My father estimated it was about 2 meters tall and 5 meters long. We scrambled up the tree with Whitey as the creature bellowed again. For nearly 20 minutes, it stood in the shallow water, surveying the lake. It didn't seem hostile, just imposing and otherworldly. Eventually, it submerged and disappeared. When it was gone, we bolted. I'd never run so fast in my life. Even now, I can still see it in my dreams. Its scaled body and piercing presence. I've never told anyone about it because it defies everything I've learned about evolution and extinction. To this day, I wonder, could something prehistoric still be hiding in the remote corners of the world, far from human interference? That night left me with more questions than answers, but one thing is certain, I'll never forget what I saw. When I was 19, I was studying accountancy part-time at the University of South Africa, while working as a bookkeeper for a medical company. Our offices were located on the premises of a rehabilitation hospital in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. This hospital specialized in treating addicts and helping patients recover mobility using prosthetics. Before it became a rehab facility, it was an old mining hospital. Our offices were in what we believed had once been the hospital's laundry area. One of my responsibilities was assisting the financial manager with monthly reports. This often required working late, especially around month end, sometimes until midnight. Most of the time, I was the only one there during these late night sessions. Occasionally, the manager would stay late as well. Our office setup was straightforward. It was a large hall with dry-walled private offices along one side, reserved for people like myself and department heads who dealt with confidential information. The rest of the hall was open plan, brightly lit, and spacious. On several occasions, while working alone at night, I noticed something unusual. A shadow would pass by my open office door, sometimes once, sometimes twice, moving in one direction, and then the other. Occasionally, I even heard footsteps, though not always. The shadow, which I often caught in my peripheral vision above my monitor, was roughly human-sized and shaped like an upside-down egg. It was black, but had a semi-transparent aura around it, if I can describe it that way. Oddly, I never felt fear when I saw the shadow. It always seemed purposeful, as though it had somewhere to go. There was no sense of randomness, no sudden chills or temperature changes, and nothing ever felt out of place. I simply had the same feeling of a presence passing by my door as I would if a colleague had walked by during the day. The first few times, curiosity got the better of me. I stood up, walked to the door, and scanned the open plan work floor, which was always well lit. I never saw anyone there, and I'd return to my desk feeling puzzled. Still, since it didn't frighten me, I would quickly go back to work. One day, I mentioned these occurrences to my manager, asking if car lights or something else could be causing the shadow. To my surprise, she said she hadn't experienced anything herself and didn't believe in such things. But she had heard similar stories from some of the department heads who worked in offices along the same row as mine. Curious, I spoke to them as soon as I could. Their accounts were strikingly similar to mine. One department head who managed accounts receivable admitted she was so unnerved by the shadow and other strange occurrences, which I plan to recount in future, that she refused to work alone or stay a minute past 5 p.m. Although nothing physical ever happened to her, she was nervous about anything remotely paranormal. I still wonder if the shadow I saw was a ghost, perhaps of an old employee or patient. For some reason, I've always felt it might be the spirit of a motherly old black woman who worked at the hospital long ago. I can't explain why I feel this way, it's just an impression that has stayed with me. Even today, the memory of those quiet nights and the shadow passing by my door lingers. It never scared me, but it has certainly left me with questions I may never have answers to. This happened in 2003 at my fiance's parents' house in Johannesburg. When they bought the house, it was in terrible condition, dilapidated and vandalized. But they loved projects like this, so they slowly started fixing it up, adding rooms and making it their own. Even now, I find the house creepy, more so than when I first visited. I can't explain why, but it gives me an uneasy feeling. If you've ever seen the movie Rose Red, you'll understand why I call this house by the same name. Every time we visited, they'd knocked down one wall and rebuilt it somewhere else, making the house feel like it was constantly changing. Now let me get to the story. This happened to a close friend of mine, someone who never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. Until that night. One summer evening, while waiting for my fiance's brother to finish in the bathroom, my friend was standing in the kitchen, playing with the family dog, Zeus. The house was quiet, with no one else around. It was a lovely evening, peaceful and calm. What could go wrong? While she was playing with Zeus, the dog suddenly bolted toward my fiance's bedroom. Concerned that he might need to go outside or was about to make a mess, she followed him. She also worried that my fiance's brother might be trying to scare her. As she approached the bedroom, she was met with complete darkness. Feeling uneasy, she stopped near the door and called out to the dog. Bending down slightly, she said, "Zeus, come here, boy." But instead of the dog, she heard a voice, a small child's voice, repeat her words from the darkness, "Zeus, come here, boy," followed by a giggle. Terrified, she ran as fast as she could to the flatlet on the other end of the house. By the time she got there, she was pale as a sheet and completely out of breath. My fiance's brother, soaking wet, had just come out of the bathroom after hearing her scream. When he finally calmed her down, she insisted she hadn't screamed, but she told him about the voice in the dark. He swore he'd heard a blood-curdling scream and thought someone was trying to hurt her. To this day, she maintains she didn't scream. We told my fiance's parents about the incident, but they brushed it off, saying there was nothing to be afraid of and that we were imagining things. I'm not sure if it's connected, but a few months later, Zetus got spooked, jumped through a window, and ran away. He was never found. This was completely out of character for him. He was a sweet, well-natured dog who had never done anything like that before. Even now, when we visit my fiance's parents, I still get shivers down my spine being in that house. I'm convinced that animals can sense things we can't, and whatever Zeus saw or felt that night might explain why he ran. But as always, we were told we were dreaming. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my sister and I spent Saturday nights at our granny and grandpa's house in Peter Maritzburg. It was the 1980s, back when Lay Law aired right after Graham Hart finished the weather on the old ABC News. Their house on Boar Street was old, but to us, it was just where we stayed while our parents took a night off. One evening, as I sat next to my granny, I noticed an old man sitting in the rocking chair in the corner of the lounge. He kept blocking my view of the TV, so I asked her who he was. She looked at me and said there was no old man in the corner. I wasn't scared, just annoyed that I couldn't see the TV properly, especially since I had been allowed to stay up so late. Years later, my mom admitted she'd seen the old man too, but had never told anyone. She said he wasn't mean or harmful, just stuck there. I often saw the old man in the corner. After that, but I stopped mentioning it. Granny seemed to think I was just making it up. Then a few years later, when the wooden floors in the house were being replaced, workers found bones underneath the floorboards. No one knew if they were human or animal, so the police were called. We never found out what the bones were, but strangely, after they were removed, neither my mom nor I saw the old man again. The second strange experience happened after Granny and Grandpa moved to another old house at the base of Albert Falls Wall. This house was even more unsettling. My uncle's bedroom was at the front of the house, far from the rest of the family's rooms, and that's where my sister and I had to sleep. The moment we walked into the room, we both felt it. It was freezing cold. It was the middle of summer, with temperatures soaring to 37 degrees Celsius, yet the room was ice cold. The rest of the house was perfectly warm. That night, my sister and I were in separate beds with a nightstand between them. The lamp on the nightstand wouldn't turn off, no matter how hard we tried. Finally, my grandpa came in and unscrewed the bulb to turn it off. The room stayed freezing, and my sister suddenly accused me of pulling her blankets off, but I wasn't touching her. I tried to tell her it wasn't me, but I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with fear. A few minutes later, my sister shouted at me again to stop pulling her blankets. This time, Grandpa came back to check on us. He told us to keep quiet and go to sleep, but when he tried to turn on the overhead light, it wouldn't work. He had to grab the bulb from the nightstand lamp and put it back in. That's when we all saw it. My sister's blankets were thrown across the room. Suddenly, I could speak again, and I told Grandpa what had been happening. We refused to sleep in that room again. That night, we dragged our blankets to Granny and Grandpa's room and slept on the floor. None of us ever wanted to go back into that room. The house didn't get any better. Over the next 3 weeks, it became increasingly menacing. The cold from that room spread, and there were days when frost would appear on the windows, even in the height of summer. The entire place felt hostile. The farm workers who lived nearby called the house evil and refused to go near it. Thankfully, Granny and Grandpa moved out shortly after. I've never been so relieved. To this day, I don't know what was wrong with that house, but I'm glad we never had to visit it again. My name is Ashley, and I live in South Africa. A few years ago, my friends and I had an experience I'll never forget, an encounter that still sends chills down my spine. It started when a group of us, all around 16 years old, used to hang out at a sports field about 5 blocks from my dad's house. The field was divided into 2 levels. The main soccer field sloped down to a smaller field at the back, where dog training sessions were often held. Behind that smaller field was a cluster of trees hiding the entrance to a large gutter. This gutter served as a rainwater drainage tunnel and was big enough for several people to walk through at the same time. It stretched deep underground, with a constant trickle of water seeping out. The tunnel itself was about 500 meters from a massive abandoned mine dump, one of many in our area. The mines were long deserted, adding an eerie vibe to the place. One day, the 5 of us decided the tunnel would be our new hangout spot. I wasn't about to let being the only girl make me back out, so I went in first with a flashlight, or torch as we call it here. The walls immediately freaked me out. They were covered in satanic symbols, including pentagrams, some of which looked like they were drawn in blood. I called the boys in, and despite the unsettling markings, they decided it was perfect for our little group. For months, we visited the tunnel without incident, though I always felt uneasy. The dark, narrow space and sinister drawings never sat right with me. Over time, our group grew smaller as life got in the way. Eventually, it was just my best friend, Solly, and me. One afternoon, Solly and I went to the tunnel alone to reminisce about old times. We were sitting there talking when we started hearing strange noises. It sounded like a woman moaning deep inside the tunnel. We hoped we were alone, but we couldn't shake the sound, so we grabbed our flashlights and walked further in to investigate. We didn't see anyone, but the sound lingered. Curious, we returned a few days later with our other friends. This time, we were prepared, bringing cameras and brighter flashlights. We planned to explore deeper into the tunnel to see if we could figure out what was causing the sounds. What happened next still haunts me. As we ventured further in, the symbols on the walls grew more disturbing. About 15 minutes in, we stumbled upon what looked like a devil's trap, a strange symbol drawn in the middle of the floor believed to trap evil spirits. Just beyond it, the symbols abruptly stopped. That's when we heard the moaning again, louder this time. Shining our flashlights ahead, we saw her, a woman standing against the left wall. Her skin was a sickly gray, and she looked emaciated and wounded. She was nude, her body covered in gashes, and she shook as she moaned. We froze. Slowly, I backed away, signaling the others to follow. She didn't move at first, but as we turned to leave, she started following us. Then she began disappearing and reappearing, each time closer to us. We panicked and ran for the entrance. As we fled, one of my friends, Angelo, screamed, claiming she had attacked him. When we finally made it out of the tunnel, we gathered ourselves, trembling and out of breath. Angelo showed us his back. It had a red handprint as though someone had slapped him hard. We realized Anton, who had been filming, had dropped the camera during the chaos. The footage, along with any proof of what we saw, was lost in the tunnel. We never went back. After that night, we learned from local residents that the tunnel was rumored to be haunted. People living nearby reported hearing a woman crying and moaning late at night. A few years later, Angelo's story, along with the handprint on his back, made it into the local newspaper. To this day, I won't even set foot near that field. Whatever we encountered in that tunnel wasn't something I ever want to face again. Ever since I was a child, I noticed strange things happening around me. I always thought it was just my imagination, because I was taught that ghosts don't exist. But in 2007, my family moved into a house that I believe was the most haunted place I've ever lived. We moved there in June 2007. The house was closer to my school, and we were renting it until My mom could buy a new one. We stayed for about a year and a half. At first, the house didn't seem creepy, unlike some of the other places we had lived. The only thing that made me uneasy was a small crucifix above the doorframe in the entrance hall. For some reason, I always felt scared to be home alone at night, even if nothing seemed wrong. One day after school, I came home with my boyfriend and found my older sister sitting in my room with the door closed. She looked scared. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she had been listening to music in the lounge when she saw something in the reflection of the TV. It looked like a terrifying figure standing behind her. When she turned around, it disappeared. My boyfriend and I checked the lounge, but we didn't find anything. I told her it was probably her imagination, since she often said she saw things. A few months later, my boyfriend and I were at home alone. He was lying on my bed, and I had gone to the bathroom. I heard him call my name, so I shouted back, letting him know I was in the bathroom. When I came back, he looked really freaked out. At first, he didn't want to tell me what had happened, but after I insisted, he said he had seen me standing in the doorway, staring at him with a strange, scary expression. I told him it couldn't have been me since I was in the bathroom. He still insists it was me, even though he doesn't believe in ghosts. On my birthday in December 2008, I had some friends over. Everything was fine until just before midnight. My boyfriend had left, and two friends and I were sitting in the lounge. The atmosphere felt strange, and we all seemed uncomfortable. I suggested moving to my room. One friend refused to come, trying to act brave, so I turned off the lounge light and left him there. After a while, my mom came to my room, asking about my friend. A moment later, he walked into my room, pale and scared. He said the furniture in the lounge had started moving, and he saw things moving in the dark. He also felt like he couldn't move. While he was talking, I noticed a shadow on the floor. It was pitch black, almost solid, and it moved across the floor, up the wall, and onto the ceiling before disappearing into the corner. I felt extremely cold and couldn't look away. After that night, more strange things happened. I started waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. almost every night. Sometimes I felt like someone had woken me up by whispering in my ear, and I even felt cold breath on my skin. On 2 occasions, I clearly heard whispering, indistinct words, but I ignored it. Once, I saw a white, semi-transparent ball floating in my room. It disappeared when I called my sister. The scariest experience happened 2 weeks before we moved out. I was texting my boyfriend late at night when I heard furniture being dragged across the floor. There were loud banging sounds, as if someone was shoving the couches around. I got a text from my older sister in the next room asking if I could hear it. I told her to ignore it, but her reply scared me. She said she could hear a girl crying loudly, walking up and down the hallway, and she begged me to come to her room. I was too scared to leave my room, and so was she. Later, my aunt told us she had also heard a girl crying at night and thought it was my little sister. But when she checked, my sister had been sound asleep. My aunt joked that maybe the ghost was crying because it didn't want us to move out. We finally moved, and I'm relieved to say our new house is quiet and peaceful, but I'll never forget the strange things that happened in that house. I'm 24 now, and for as long as I can remember, I've had strange experiences. I've always been able to hear, feel, and see spirits. In my family, I'm not the only one with this ability, but it seems like I'm the only one affected by it as strongly. When I see spirits, they're usually fully dressed, with clear details, but I can never make out their faces. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, the house we lived in was haunted, especially the room I slept in. I would often hear men laughing near the corner of the room by the window, as if they were having a party. At night, taps in the house would turn on by themselves, including the ones in the bathroom, and the kettle would randomly switch on. Things got worse over time, so we moved. Our neighbor told my mom that they had strange experiences too. Photos of demons they tried to burn wouldn't catch fire. Their son had accidentally been shot in their house, and exactly 1 year later, their daughter tried to take her own life but survived, though she was left blind. I always felt like something from their house had affected ours since we visited each other often. In another house we stayed in, I woke up one night and saw a man standing at the foot of my bed. He was wearing the exact clothes my grandfather had worn that day, but my grandfather was alive and asleep in another room. I couldn't scream, move, or even breathe. It felt like I was paralyzed. Only when the man vanished could I move again. When I checked, my grandfather was still sleeping. My mom said it was my guardian angel, but I'd never seen him again. And if